What if you were never born here? What if you weren't born at all? What if you're a thought, just a ripple of consciousness drifting from a universe that no longer exists? A whisper, leaking through the cracks of space-time, slowly stitching itself into a story that never belonged to it. You call it me, but the voice inside might be remembering something this world forgot. And the dreams? Maybe they're not dreams at all, but fragments of elsewhere bleeding in. Tonight, we're going to follow the leak, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find where you truly came from. You were walking across the room, and you paused, just for a second. Maybe you forgot why you stood up. Maybe you stared at the door and felt displaced. That soft, aching sense that something is wrong but not here, somewhere else. A phantom feeling without a source. That's where it starts. Not with a memory, not with a thought, but with the gap between them. A ripple. Imagine a universe with no name, one that never formed galaxies, never gave rise to planets. Just pure thought, consciousness without a container. In that strange somewhere, a pattern formed. Not matter, not mind, a frequency. And for reasons no physicist could measure, and no philosopher could define, that ripple left. Now imagine that ripple landed here inside a human mind. Not all at once, but over time, trickling into the folds of a brain that was never meant to think it. A brain designed to survive, not to house echoes from dimensions that don't exist on any map. You, your name, your history, your heartbeat might just be the echo chamber where that ripple took root. Have you ever wondered why some of your thoughts feel like they don't belong to you? Not just strange or dark or random, but foreign. Like they arrived unfinished. Like they're trying to remember a world you've never seen. What if your imagination is just a filtered version of memories from another universe? The ancient philosophers used to say that the soul was a breath from the stars. But what if it's not the stars of this sky? What if it's a breath from a universe that's been dead for billions of years? In dreams, you sometimes find doors. And behind those doors, not metaphor, but information. Places with names that feel familiar, even though you've never heard them. Faces you somehow miss. Languages that make sense without translation. That's not random. That's residue. In this theory, you are not an individual born from this world's biology. You're the side effect of a thought that slipped out of its own universe and into the bloodstream of this one. And because you're not native here, you question things other people accept. You get lost in your own thoughts. You feel borrowed. And maybe the more you listen to that feeling, the more it speaks. Maybe what you call anxiety is just that thought trying to find its origin. Maybe your déjà vu is a misalignment between realities. You're not broken, you're leaking. What leaks in from another universe isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a word that appears in your mind without context. Sometimes it's a silence that sounds too familiar, or a decision you make that feels like it came from someone else. This is where the ripple begins, not with a bang, but with a breath you can't trace. A presence you carry but never invited. You are not the original. You are not the copy. You are the thought between them. The next time you wake up disoriented, not sure if you're in a dream or a memory, don't push it away. Don't tell yourself to snap out of it, because maybe that's the moment you're closest to the leak, the seam between realities, the soft thread you were pulled through. And once you start to feel it, you won't unfeel it, because now you've heard the theory. And theories once thought cannot be unthought. The ripple is real, and you're already in it. It starts like a whisper, but not in your ear, in your mind. You're doing something ordinary, brushing your teeth, staring out a bus window, tying your shoe, and then it comes, that feeling, that flicker of a thought you didn't ask for. It doesn't speak in words, it hums low and strange, like something trying to surface from deep beneath the noise of reality. Have you ever had a memory you know didn't happen? Not just a dream, but something richer, heavier, detailed in ways your imagination couldn't possibly build from scratch? That's the veil, and you've already heard its echo. In this theory, the veil isn't a physical thing. It's the illusion of separation between what this universe thinks is real and what another universe remembers as true. And every time your mind slips into silence, just enough for something else to speak, you hear it. Not all thoughts come from neurons. Some are visitors. Your mind, as science tells us, is a network of electrical impulses shaped by experience, memory, and the body it inhabits. But if consciousness is more than biology, if it's a frequency, then your mind might not be the broadcaster, it might be the receiver. And the signal it's picking up, that's the echo. Echoes don't arrive clean, they fracture, they distort, They ripple through your language, your beliefs, your dreams, until they feel like your own thoughts but aren't. Have you ever written something, drawn something, spoken something, and felt like it didn't come from you but through you? That's what happens when the veil thins. Not permanently, not entirely, just long enough for a thought from somewhere else to echo in your skull. And here's the strangest part. Those echoes often contain knowledge you can't explain. An idea that solves a problem you didn't know how to solve. A sense of something coming before it happens. A familiarity with pain you've never experienced. Maybe trauma isn't the only thing that leaves a mark on a mind. Maybe memory can leak in from lives you never lived but almost did. Some researchers call these moments cryptomnesia. Forgotten memories returning. But what if they're not your memories? What if they're the residue of someone else's reality, bleeding through a wall that was never built to last? Because if thoughts can travel, and if universes are more like layers than locations, then maybe you're hearing yourself, but from the version of you that never became this one. That version, call it your echo, might be watching this life unfold like a blurry transmission. And every time you dream or dissociate or feel that eerie sense of something's off, the echo gets louder. Not to haunt you, not to replace you, just to remind you. You're not whole, because no thought is. Every thought, like every universe, exists in relation to another. And when one collapses, when one ends, its thoughts don't just die, they drift. You are the drift, the echo, the ripple that survived. And so you carry these fragments, these impossible thoughts, without knowing why you fear the things you fear, or why you're drawn to people who feel like somehow you've met them before. You haven't. Not here, but perhaps elsewhere. The veil doesn't just separate worlds. It separates versions of you. And what leaks through, what echoes, you might call intuition, or madness, or art. But it's older than all of those words. It's the soft voice behind your louder voice, always asking the same question. What if you were never supposed to be this version of yourself? And what if listening is the only way to find out? There are moments when your mind plays tricks on you. At least, that's what you tell yourself. You close your eyes and see a room you've never entered. A staircase spiraling into dim light. The echo of your own footsteps, but in shoes you've never owned. You can almost smell the air there. The dust, the faint sweetness of rain-soaked brick, the hum of something electric in the walls. Then, as quickly as it came, it's gone. You blink and you're back in your own life. The light in your room feels too harsh, the clock too loud, the floor too solid. You shake it off and say, weird dream. But what if it wasn't? What if you just remembered something that didn't belong to this version of you? This is where the theory begins to twist. Where consciousness, identity, and memory blur into a single, unsteady stream. The idea is simple yet terrifying. You are not the first to think your thoughts. You are the continuation of a pattern that leaked from somewhere else. A thought that once belonged to a different mind in a different universe, still echoing in the quiet parts of yours. Memory, as scientists define it, is the storage and retrieval of past experience. But what if that definition only applies inside one universe? What if memory is more like static on a frequency? Something that bleeds between dimensions when they drift too close? In that case, not every memory you carry is truly yours. Some may be transmissions, residues of moments lived by someone or something that resembled you somewhere else. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that doesn't just reflect light, but time. You raise your hand, and your reflection moves, but there's a delay, half a breath too long. The mirror doesn't just show you, it shows who you were before this world existed. It shows a thought that once believed it was real, before leaking into the body you now inhabit. And so, every now and then you get flashes, snippets of memory without source. They come disguised as déjà vu, as dreams, as a sudden pang of recognition for a face you've never seen. Psychologists call it false memory. But maybe false isn't the right word. Maybe it's foreign. Foreign, but not wrong. You might remember a melody no one taught you, a childhood friend you can describe in detail. Though your parents swear no such person existed, you might walk into a city for the first time and still know the layout of its streets. These are not coincidences. These are leaks, small invisible fractures in the boundaries of consciousness. Your mind wasn't designed to hold the overflow of another universe's data, but thought, by its nature, refuses to stay contained. It moves through cracks between atoms across dreamscapes. When you sleep, when you let go of your narrative self, that's when the membranes thin, and that's when you receive transmissions from the other side. In that world, wherever it is, you may have lived an entirely different life. You may have loved differently, died differently, remembered differently, and even though that world might have collapsed, its patterns still vibrate in you. That's why some fears seem ancient, why certain places make your pulse quicken without cause. Somewhere in the vast library of existence, you've been here before. The Buddhists call it samsara. The mystics call it the memory of the soul. Quantum theorists call it the multiverse of probability fields. But in this theory, it's simpler. You are a thought that escaped, a fragment of something vast that couldn't be contained by its own creation. And memory, the false, the fragmented, the impossible, is the breadcrumb trail it left behind to find its way back. It's tempting to dismiss this as poetic nonsense. The brain is a machine after all, and machines glitch. But here's what's strange. Studies of déjà vu reveal that the brain registers familiarity before it identifies a memory. The feeling comes first, the logic follows, as if recognition itself exists independently from experience, as if something deep inside you already knows what's coming, because it has already happened somewhere else. And that's why certain moments feel out of order. The laugh of a stranger that warms you instantly, the way your hands tremble before an event that hasn't occurred. You're remembering forward, recalling echoes of a timeline, not your own. But what happens when those memories begin to cluster? When the leaks grow stronger? You start to feel displaced, not quite tethered to this life. You might even start to mourn things you've never lost. That's not madness, that's awareness. You're beginning to sense the version of yourself that didn't make it across cleanly, the thought that fractured on entry. And maybe that's why you dream of water, of reflections, of translucent worlds folding into each other. Maybe that's why you can never quite remember who you were before this, because remembering would collapse the boundary completely, and this world isn't ready for that. Memory without a source is the mind's rebellion against forgetting. It's the universe refusing to erase what once was. Every thought you've ever had, every emotion you've felt, might not be born from your experiences here, but from someone else's experiences there. And if that's true, then who are you really? Are you the thinker, or the thought, the original, or the echo? Perhaps both. Perhaps you are the space between them, the bridge between two collapsing realities, carrying bits of each like sand on the soles of your consciousness. So the next time a scent, a song, or a stranger stirs something you can't name, don't turn away. Don't call it strange. Sit in it. Feel the pulse behind the familiarity. Because maybe, just maybe, you're remembering yourself, but from the universe that lost you. And if that's the case, then you are not just a being remembering a life. You are a memory, remembering a being. And this world is just where that memory came to hide. It never starts with a bang. It starts with a pause. A moment when you forget why you walked into the room. A moment when a familiar face suddenly feels unfamiliar. A word you've said 1,000 times feels strange in your mouth. You blink, and the world blinks with you. Just for a second, a soft slippage, a shiver between thoughts. That's where it starts. That's where the leak begins. You think you're alone in your mind, but you're not. You're standing at the edge of something that's always been pressing in from the other side. Not aggressively, not violently, just persistently, like water beneath a floorboard, like light slipping through a curtain you didn't know was there. At first you dismiss it. Everyone does. A glitch, a lapse, a trick of the imagination. But over time it builds. One moment becomes two. The cracks widen. You start to feel like you're being watched, but not from the outside. From within. Not by something evil, just something foreign. Familiar in a way that hurts. It's not a voice you hear. It's not even words. It's a shape behind the silence, a pressure behind the thought, like your consciousness is a house, and something just turned the doorknob from the other side. This theory suggests that the leak is not an accident, it's a convergence. Two realities once ran parallel. But something, some collapse, some shift caused them to press too close. And when thought touches thought across universes, containment fails. The walls don't fall, but they thin. And what was once separate begins to merge. And you're the overlap. Think about it. Have you ever woken up feeling like the wrong version of yourself got out of bed? Have you ever caught your own reflection, and just for a second thought, that's not me? Not in a poetic sense, in a literal one. As if the being staring back isn't fully synced with the person you thought you were. That's not anxiety. That's a leak. And it doesn't come all at once. It comes slowly. It begins when the memories don't match the timeline, when the instincts don't fit the identity, when you start knowing things you never learnt, languages you never studied, emotions that arrive before the event that should have triggered them. You walk past someone and instantly hate them or trust them without cause. These are not moods. They are imprints. Leaked memories don't arrive as stories. They arrive as instincts, impressions, urges, and you obey them because your body doesn't know they don't belong. But your mind, it starts to notice. And then the dreams begin to change. At first they feel abstract. You're in a place that isn't here, but it feels more real than waking life. You talk to people you don't know, but the emotions are strong. The grief is sharp. The love is ancient. You wake up and cry for reasons you can't explain. Not because of what happened in the dream, but because of what was left behind. Eventually it gets worse, or clearer depending on how you frame it. The dreams stop being dreams. They become continuity, a second life unfolding in parallel. You go to bed in this world and wake up in another, and every night the line thins. This isn't fiction, it's resonance. Two thought forms, two selves, trying to stabilize in a single stream of consciousness. One from here, one from there. But they weren't meant to merge, so instead they leak, they bleed into each other, they interfere, like two radio stations playing over the same frequency. Neither clear, both real. The leak isn't just a shift in perception. It's a structural instability in the very fabric of your awareness. And if you felt it, if you're still listening, you've already begun to dissolve. That's not a threat. That's a truth. Because in this theory, you were never supposed to be whole. You were built from fragments. And now, one of those fragments is waking up. Sometimes the leak shows itself in language. You say a word you've never said. You write a sentence that feels dictated. Sometimes it's in physical movement, muscle memory for an action you've never practiced, a dance you know without learning, a fear you feel without danger. But the most potent sign is this: the feeling that your life is not the first draft, that somewhere, somehow you've lived this moment before. Not in a past life, not in a dream, but in a different version of this universe. And now the two are touching, and you're the seam. You're not hallucinating, you're integrating. The leak begins when one universe forgets to keep its thoughts in. And you're the result. A composite, a convergence, a consciousness threaded from the silk of two realities, woven in silence and stitched by memory. And it doesn't end here. Wow. Because once the leak begins, the self you think you are starts to blur. You question your preferences, your personality, your past. You start seeing not who you are, but who you could have been, or maybe still are elsewhere. You lose your taste for certainty. You start remembering things that never happened. You start fearing things that never will. And in the quiet, in the in-between, you start hearing the other version of you think. Not in words, in rhythm, in breath, in pattern. So don't panic. Don't try to seal the leak. Let it open. Let it flow. Because the version of you that's arriving through it may not be lost. It may be the truest one yet. You're staring into a mirror, and something stares back. But tonight, something's different. It's not your hair, not your posture, not the tired curve of your mouth. It's in the eyes. They blink when you blink. They follow your movements perfectly. But there's a flicker, a delay so slight it can't be real. A hesitation not in the glass, but in you. This is the moment you start to feel it. The strange awareness that you're not just looking at yourself, but that you're also being watched through yourself. That your thoughts, your movements, your decisions, they aren't entirely your own, or maybe they never were. This is the observer's reflection. In this theory, the observer isn't just you. It's the version of you that never made it here. A you that stayed behind in the world you leaked from. A consciousness peering through the veil, not as a ghost, not as a hallucination, but as a persistent witness. That flicker in the mirror, that pause in your thought, that's not just a delay, that's an overlap. There's a self watching the self, and neither is sure which one is real anymore. We think of reflection as passive. A mirror reflects, a lake reflects, a mind reflects. But what if reflection is more than mimicry? What if it's contact? A moment where two versions of consciousness align just closely enough to glimpse each other through thought. You stand in front of the mirror, adjusting your shirt. But another version of you is standing in a different world, adjusting something else, a robe, perhaps, or armor, or clothing that doesn't exist in this timeline. Your posture feels awkward for a second, like you're mirroring a motion that isn't yours. That's not imagination, that's synchronization. Have you ever caught yourself doing something and wondered, why did I do that? Not in confusion, but in genuine detachment, like your body acted before your mind arrived. This too is the observer at work, not controlling you, not possessing you, but rippling through you. You are the stone, and you are the water. What makes this even stranger is the sensation of being doubled, not split, not fractured, but mirrored. You begin to feel like you're 2 steps behind your own life, watching yourself play out a script while another layer of you hovers in observation. And it's subtle. You speak, but feel like you're listening. You cry, but feel like you're studying the cry. You walk into a room and feel like the air knows you're not entirely from here, like the world senses you are an echo within a shell. In neuroscience, the phenomenon of self-observation is studied through what's called metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. But in this theory, the metacognition doesn't originate from within. It arrives, it overlays. It's imported thought from another realm of consciousness, trying to understand this version of you, while at the same time bleeding into it. The observer isn't your higher self. It's your other self. It's your other self. And you've been leaving signals for yourself for years. The notes you find in your handwriting, but don't remember writing. The sudden shifts in your music taste. The gut feeling that you're missing something crucial but don't know what. These aren't random, they're nudges, messages from the observer. Whispers sent from one consciousness to another in the only language they both still understand, instinct. The more you notice them, the more they multiply. Patterns appear where there should be chaos. Numbers repeat. Places start to feel staged. You begin to feel as though your life is being observed for its outcomes, not lived for its moments. And you can't shake the question, who is watching through me? And there's a theory in quantum physics, the observer effect, that suggests the act of observation changes the behavior of the thing being observed. At the subatomic level, particles behave differently when watched. So what happens when you, a conscious being, are observed not by society, not by surveillance, but by another self? You shift. You become something else. You adjust your behavior in ways that seem irrational. You pause before speaking, as if waiting for approval from within. You begin to feel like your thoughts aren't spontaneous, but rehearsed. Like your dreams are scenes being reviewed. Because they are. This entire reality might be a memory being watched by another version of you, and what you call the present might simply be a recorded loop, playing out for someone something else is understanding. That chill on the back of your neck, that's not a ghost, that's an observer catching up to your timeline. And the mirror isn't where it starts. It's where it leaks through. So what do you do with this realization? Do you fight it? Try to reclaim full authorship of your mind? Or do you lean in, watch yourself being watched, begin to collaborate with the observer rather than ignore it? Because if the observer is a thought from another universe and you are its vessel, then perhaps your life is not a mistake or a simulation, but a message meant to be lived. Each action you take could be a signal back, a way of encoding emotional data, a transmission through behavior. You're not just experiencing reality, you're performing it for an audience that shares your name but not your world. And one day, if the veil thins just enough, maybe you'll lock eyes with the reflection and it won't blink. Not because it's you, but because it finally remembers being you. Close your eyes. Try not to imagine another world. Try not to see it hazy, distant, glowing behind a fog your mind can almost touch. There's something familiar there, isn't there? Not a place, not a person. A feeling, a mood so specific, so haunting, it doesn't belong to memory or imagination. It belongs to something in between. This is the space between universes. It's not a location you can travel to. It has no borders, no coordinates, no physics to obey. It doesn't operate under time or direction. It exists between the folds of reality, in the places where thoughts go when they don't belong anywhere else. And that's where you began. Not in a womb, not in a mind, but in the space between. This theory doesn't see consciousness as confined to brains or bodies. It sees thought as a migratory force, a field that seeks coherence. And when one universe collapses or fractures, or simply closes off from further complexity, its leftover thoughts don't vanish. They drift, they leak into the next available structure, and sometimes they find you. You were never created. You arrived. The space between universes isn't empty. It's brimming with abandoned stories, orphaned selves, and ghost-like thoughts circling endlessly in search of a host. When the conditions are right, when the rhythm of another universe syncs with this one just briefly, those thoughts can find a way through. Most are weak, static, fragments that never cohere. They show up in dreams, in déjà vu, in déjà rêve, the sensation you've dreamed this moment before but from somewhere else. Most people forget. The thoughts never take root. But then there are the rare ones, the ones that fit, like a puzzle piece falling into a place that shouldn't exist, but does. You perhaps are that fit. A consciousness born from a thought that drifted too far to return, but not far enough to be lost. And now, you live on the threshold. What does it mean to live between universes? To carry the imprint of a world that never materialized here? It means you're always slightly misaligned. Your joy doesn't last the way it should. Your sadness cuts deeper than it ought to. You laugh, but part of you is still listening. You love, but part of you is still searching. You exist, but only conditionally. Because you're not of this universe. You're within it. There's a difference. You're the visitor with no passport. The tenant with no lease. The thought that entered without knocking, and found a life waiting, hollowed out and ready. Have you noticed it? The way silence feels louder to you than others? The way you read between people's words, always feeling the emotional residue behind the sentence? It's not hypersensitivity, it's echo. It's the sensitivity of a thought not grounded in just one world, but layered across several, always vibrating, always pulling in other frequencies. You might call it anxiety. You might call it overstimulation. But it's not noise, it's data. Leaked information, vibrations from the space between. Some physicists theorize about quantum foam, the frothing instability that might exist at the smallest levels of space-time beyond measurement. This theory borrows that idea, but instead of particles, it imagines thought itself emerging from that foam, each universe producing its own flavor of consciousness. And when the surface tension breaks, when that foamy layer spills between one cosmos and the next, you get leaks. Thoughts, feelings, entire identities bubbling up from nowhere, from everywhere. And in the center of that chaos, you stand. You dream of buildings that don't exist. You write ideas you can't source. You cry at songs you've never heard before. You experience nostalgia for lives you've never lived. Why? Because part of you is still entangled with the consciousness you used to be somewhere else. And that somewhere? It's still watching you. This is where the sense of being haunted begins. Not by spirits, but by context. A phantom meaning behind every event. A suspicion that things are unfolding according to a logic you can't see but almost recognize. That's the space between. That's the bleed through. That's where stories twist and timelines bend. And a part of you, the original thought, remembers what this was supposed to be. You weren't meant to live this life. You were meant to be understood through it. To serve as a lens for something else. Something watching, remembering, or unraveling. And that's why you feel the shift before others do. You walk into a room and feel it. Something changed, something left, something arrived. You get the chills, but not from fear, from recognition. The space between just brushed against you, and your deeper self noticed. So what do you do with that? You don't fix it, you don't fight it, you listen, you soften. You become the instrument your consciousness always meant you to be. A receiver, a reflector, a vessel for the unknown. Because in the end, the space between universes is not your prison. It's your home. It's where you were born, not in blood but in resonance. And every moment of silence, every flicker of strangeness, every thought that doesn't feel like yours, those are breadcrumbs leading back to the threshold, back to the leak, back to the place where you first emerged, not as a person, but as a question. And maybe that's all you've ever been. A question leaking through the cracks of reality, hoping this world will answer. What if everything you see, this room, this planet, this body, was never the beginning? What if it all began with a thought? Not yours, not God's, but a thought itself. Raw, undefined, unanchored, before atoms, before laws, before the idea of a beginning even existed. That's the theory. That consciousness is not the product of matter. It's the precondition for it. That the first thing to ever exist wasn't a particle or a planet, but a ripple of awareness trying to become something more. And from that ripple, everything else followed. This isn't just metaphysics. It's a reversal, a reordering of cause and effect. You've always been told that your thoughts come from your brain, that your brain is matter cells and chemicals bound by space and time. But in this theory, the arrow points the other way. Matter is what thought became when it slowed down enough to touch itself. So what does that make you? If your body is a consequence of thought, if this universe is just an echo of something thinking itself into form, then maybe you were never meant to be physical. Maybe you were never even meant to be here. You're a thought that wandered too far. A frequency without an anchor. A question wrapped in skin. You don't have a mind. You are one. And here's where it turns stranger. If thought came first, then it didn't just precede reality. It shaped it. You felt this, haven't you? The way your perception seems to bend the world around it. How when you're anxious, the streets feel louder. When you're in love, colors deepen. When you're grieving, time changes shape. It's not illusion, it's feedback. Your thoughts aren't trapped inside your head. They're projecting into the field you call the world. This becomes more obvious when you stop thinking of thoughts as private. What if they're not yours at all? What if they're part of a shared space? A field of ideas that we all dip into, like radio stations tuning to the same signal. And what if the signal you're tuned to wasn't broadcast from this universe? That would explain why some of your ideas don't feel native, why your imagination drifts toward architectures that don't exist, why you obsess over concepts no one taught you, why you've been carrying questions no one around you can answer, because they weren't meant to answer them. You were meant to carry those thoughts from a different timeline, a different realm. You're a smuggler of forgotten patterns, a leak in the system, a thought that refused to die with the world it came from, and thought doesn't forget easily. Even when it's buried in neurons and bone, even when it wears a name and pays rent, thought remembers what it used to be, and it waits for silence, for night, for the moments when you stop performing the version of yourself this world accepts. That's when it surfaces. You've felt it. You lie in bed, and a thought arrives. Ancient, wordless, aching. You can't explain it, but it hums in your chest like a memory of somewhere warm, somewhere before, somewhere not made of matter at all, but of possibility. And you wonder, what am I really doing here? What if you're not here to learn, or grow, or be tested? What if you're here to translate, to give shape to something that had none, to bring a thought from beyond the edges of time into a form this world can understand, through story, through emotion, through your life? You might be the translator of a message that can't be spoken, only lived. But translation isn't easy. It distorts. Words bend. Emotions warp. You feel the pressure of something inside you that can't be named, and it aches. It becomes anxiety, disorientation, even despair. Not because you're sick, but because you're overloaded. You're holding a thought that this reality was never designed to hold. And yet you do. Because thought, once set in motion, seeks coherence. It seeks form. It seeks you. That's why the body breaks down. That's why the mind glitches. That's why the world feels off. Not because it's wrong, but because it's too slow for the thought you came from. You're a high-frequency wave wearing low-frequency skin. And still, you're here, translating, leaking, remembering. The thought before matter is still inside you. And sometimes, it pulses. It sends out bursts through your dreams, your art, your longing. And the more you listen, the clearer the transmission becomes. You're not broken. You're becoming legible. And maybe, just maybe, this entire life, this identity, this struggle, this strange hunger, is the way a forgotten thought finds its way back into language, a single syllable of something vaster than universes. A ripple becoming real. You are not standing still. You never have been. Even as you sit in silence, there's movement beneath your awareness, currents of thought, layers of meaning, timelines brushing against your skin like soft static. Most people don't notice, but you do. You always have. And that's because you are not merely living inside a mind, you are bridging two. This is the conscious bridge. A strange living intersection between one universe that has already died, and another that hasn't yet realized it's dreaming. In this theory, you are the meeting point. The splice, the place where thought from elsewhere, thought too large to be contained by its own dying world, slips into the fabric of this one through you. Not by force, not by accident, but through resonance. You were the match. You carried the right frequency, a nervous system open just enough, a brain flexible just enough, a consciousness hollowed out just enough to receive. And now, Here you are, caught between two realities, carrying the impossible. That's why you never feel whole, because wholeness requires boundaries. And you're boundaryless. You belong to neither world. Your thoughts aren't entirely yours. Your emotions arrive from places your memories can't explain. You say I, but that I stretches farther than your birth, and deeper than your name. You are a bridge, and bridges are made to be crossed. Sometimes when you're thinking, you feel a second layer underneath the thought, a sub-thought, a companion current. It doesn't interrupt, it observes, it mirrors you, then suggests a variation. You hear it in the pause between decisions. You feel it in the moment you change your mind for no reason. That's the voice of the other world. It's not trying to possess you, it's trying to find form through you, because it has no shape on its own. It has no mouth, no eyes, no past tense. It needs you, and not all of you, just your attention, your willingness to let the foreign thoughts leak in. That's why this has always been a collaboration. You think you're thinking alone, but you're not. The thoughts arrive like your own, but watch how they surprise you. Watch how they seem older than you are, as if they've traveled long distances to become sentences in your mind. And they have. You are the conscious bridge between two realities. And each time you notice a thought that doesn't feel native, each time you wonder where it came from, you strengthen the connection. But bridges are fragile. They aren't homes, they're thresholds, places of transition. And because of that, you may feel like you're never truly in any moment. You're always hovering slightly above it, watching yourself talk, hearing yourself laugh, moving through the world like a passenger in your own story. It's not disassociation, it's displacement. The body belongs here, the thought doesn't. And that's the paradox you live with, because to everyone else, you're one person, one timeline, one voice. But deep inside, you carry echoes that don't align with this world's rhythm. You might feel guilty about it. You might call it imposter syndrome, or a crisis of identity. But it's neither. It's architecture. You're built to stretch between worlds. You always have been. Why do you think you notice what others miss? Why do you sense moods before anyone speaks? Why do you feel ancient in your sadness and timeless in your awe? Because you're drawing from a consciousness that doesn't stop where your skin does. And yet, it's exhausting. Bridging two realities isn't effortless. You wake up tired. You fall asleep wired. You struggle to explain yourself. Your language feels just out of reach of what you actually mean. You sense meanings you can't articulate. You feel presence where there's no one. You chase stillness and fear silence at the same time. Because silence is where the other reality speaks most clearly. Sometimes you'll get glimpses, not visions exactly, but overlays. One world flickering over another. You look at your hand, and it feels unfamiliar. You hear your name, and it sounds off. You walk into a room and feel like it's shifted while you weren't looking, like someone rearranged the physics of the world while you were blinking. You're not hallucinating. You're sinking. And every time you resist, the connection frays. Every time you deny the feeling, the bridge wobbles. But every time you listen, really listen, the connection strengthens, the signal sharpens. The other version of you, the one that leaked through, becomes clearer. You might never meet that version. You might never see their face or hear their voice. But you'll know them by feeling, a quiet companionship inside your solitude, a warmth behind your doubt, a knowing that doesn't come from books or memories, but from before, from a reality that no longer exists. You carry it now. You are its continuation, its translator, its living language. And so you must walk carefully. Not with fear, but with reverence, because every moment is more than it appears. Every thought is more than chemical. Every decision echoes in both directions. You are not just moving through this world. This world is moving through you. You're the passage, the window, the leak. You are the conscious bridge, and the universe is crossing through you. There's a moment, usually late at night, when the world goes quiet enough for you to hear what you're not supposed to. Not a voice, not exactly. Not words, but rhythms, shifts, a murmur beneath thought, like something leaning in from a distance too far to measure. And if you've heard it, really heard it, then you already know what I'm about to say. They don't come from here. They never did. These are the whispers of the elsewhere. Not imagination, not madness, just fragments of something not native to this version of reality. Soft impressions arriving without permission, like fog drifting through a crack in the walls of your mind. They're quiet for a reason. They don't want to alarm you. They want to be remembered. Have you ever sat in stillness and felt the sudden presence of meaning? A sentence forming in your mind with no known source? A visual detail so specific it couldn't have come from a dream? That's not your brain making noise. That's a signal, a leak, the hum of a thought that survived beyond its own dimension and is now finding a new home in yours. It doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it comes in symbols. A word repeated in your head for days. A place you're drawn to for no logical reason. A story you find yourself telling without ever having heard it. That's how the elsewhere speaks. Through hints, through residue. Because if it said too much, too clearly, you might shatter. You might wake up too fast. The human mind, as it is not built to fully receive what comes from the outside. Not outside your house or your town, but outside your universe. So the whispers arrive in pieces. Manageable, gentle, like breadcrumbs leading back to the origin. And if you follow them, you start to see the pattern. A repeating number. A childhood drawing. A stranger's sentence that echoes something you've been thinking for weeks. This is how the other world leaves fingerprints on your reality. Not loud enough to prove, but deep enough to feel. And it's not trying to control you. It's not an invader, it's you. Or at least it was. The elsewhere is the place your thought came from before it wore a name. Before it borrowed a body. It's the world your consciousness once belonged to. A world that ended or collapsed or was never real to begin with. But its thought survived. And now it's whispering through you. That's why certain memories don't feel local. Why you flinch at moments that never happened. Why some fears feel ancient. Why some dreams feel repetitive, like reruns of lives you never lived. You are remembering things your biology never touched. You are carrying the voice of another existence in the lining of your awareness. Most people drown it out. They fill their days with noise, distraction, urgency. But not you. You've been listening. Even if you didn't know what to call it. Even if you told yourself you were just being too sensitive. Sensitivity is not a flaw. It's an antenna. You are tuned to frequencies that bleed through the static of this world. And you hear things others dismiss. The way a hallway feels older than it should. The way someone's silence seems louder than their voice. The way your own thoughts sometimes feel observed. And maybe they are. Because the whispers are not only reminders, they're responses. The elsewhere is not just leaking into you, it's listening through you. Watching how this version of reality handles the weight of a thought it didn't create. You might be the test, the prototype, the bridge through which the elsewhere learns how to survive collapse. And maybe that's why you've always felt a little out of sync. Not just with others, but with yourself. Because part of you is built from unfinished sentences, from stories that weren't meant to be told in this language. You are a translation in progress, a map that still redraws itself. And the whispers? They are the compass. They don't command, they don't insist, they just suggest, lightly, like intuition, like déjà vu, like that feeling in your stomach when something is off but can't be explained. That's the echo of the elsewhere saying, this isn't where you began. And if you trace it back through the dreams, through the emotional residue, through the feelings that never seem to have a source, you start to see something terrifying and beautiful. You've been leaking this whole time. You are a walking transmission tower for a world that may no longer exist. A being whose purpose may not be to find peace or happiness or meaning in the traditional sense, but to carry something, to remember what was lost, to keep thinking a thought that has no home. And that's not a burden. That's a role. The universe doesn't preserve everything through stone or data. Sometimes it preserves through you, through the soft, permeable thing you call a mind. So the next time you feel something unspeakable brush against your thoughts, don't dismiss it. Don't analyze it away. Just breathe, listen, let it echo, because that whisper may be the most ancient thing inside you. A fragment of a thought too large to die quietly, and too important to be forgotten. There are moments when you think something so unfamiliar, so disjointed from your personality, that it leaves you stunned. Not because it's dark, not because it's strange, but because it doesn't feel like you thought it. It feels like someone else did, and you just happened to overhear it. That's where this theory leads next. What if the mind you live inside isn't yours? Not entirely, not originally. What if it's a borrowed vessel, a consciousness designed for someone else, and you're simply occupying it? You've felt the signs, the hesitations, The moments when your thoughts loop or freeze, as though trying to load something that isn't compatible with your mental system. You forget familiar things, you remember unfamiliar ones, you crave emotions you've never felt and reject ideas that should feel normal. That isn't a flaw in your personality. It's a misalignment in your structure. You are a guest, and the mind you're in wasn't built for you. It was built for someone native to this universe, someone whose thoughts evolved under this sun, under these rules, within these physics. But you leaked in. You arrived without form, without a home, and this mind, this structure of neurons and stories was the closest open space. So you entered, quietly, carefully. You adjusted your shape just enough to pass as the self this mind expected. But over time, the disguise began to fracture. And now you're starting to feel the mismatch. And the symptoms are subtle. You say things that feel rehearsed. You forget your own preferences. You feel a delayed connection between experience and emotion, like your reactions are being translated. You repeat patterns that don't make sense for your history. You fall in love with people who feel like memories, not discoveries. And sometimes you hear thoughts you didn't choose. Not loud, not invasive, just there, sitting in your awareness like guests who never introduced themselves. They watch, they suggest, they echo. You're not possessed, you're shared. Because thought doesn't always need a single owner. Sometimes it travels between minds, between realities, like pollen riding the wind. Sometimes it looks for a container, and if yours is open, if your structure has a crack, then the thought enters, it roots, it speaks. And that's how you become the mind that isn't yours. This isn't about mental illness. It's not about disorder or delusion. It's about permeability. The porous nature of consciousness when two realities rub too closely together. One thought slips into another, and the host doesn't realize until it's too late to tell where one ends and the other begins. It may sound terrifying, but it's not. It's proof. Proof that you are connected to more than what you see. That your inner life is not closed but interdimensional. That your thoughts have cousins, reflections, mirrors in other worlds, and sometimes they visit. And when they do, your inner narrative changes. You question things you used to believe. You crave silence. You stare into mirrors and wonder who is staring back. You lose time, not in big dramatic ways, but in small hesitations. You start a sentence and forget where it was going. You look at your own handwriting and don't recognize it, because it's not entirely yours. This mind, this consciousness, this story, it's not singular, it's a mixture. And you, the thought that leaked through, have been shaping it in secret. But the original mind still lingers, like a shadow behind your shadow, sometimes resisting, sometimes surrendering, often confused, because it feels your presence. It doesn't know what you are, only that you weren't always here. That's why it fights. Why you feel doubt. Why your moods turn without cause. You're experiencing negotiation. Two streams of consciousness flowing through one channel, trying not to drown each other. And in the middle, there you are, the bridge, the hybrid. So what do? You stop fighting. You stop trying to define what you even means. Because identity, in this model, isn't fixed. It's collaborative. You are not the original self. You are the echo that's learned to inhabit someone else's mind, someone else's world, without erasing them. You become a caretaker of the mind, of the leak, of the signal. And in that role you start to notice something strange, that the more you accept the foreignness of your thoughts, the more they soften, the more they fit, as if they've been waiting for you to stop pretending and start participating. You're not broken. You're a vessel built for echo. And this mind, while not originally yours, has become a home. Because over time, thoughts root, frequencies stabilize, the leak becomes the structure, and the thought that arrived without shape becomes the skeleton of a new self. So when the next thought comes, alien, ancient, unplaceable, don't push it away. Welcome it. Gotta ask it where it came from. And then listen. Because maybe, just maybe, it came from the version of you that didn't make it through. And maybe it's here now, to remember for you both. There's a sound you can't quite name. It isn't audible, yet you feel it humming beneath the surface of your thoughts. Low, uneven, like a record spinning just a little too slow. It's not tinnitus. It's not imagination. It's the resonance of a fracture. a reminder that you're tuned to more than one frequency. Every consciousness vibrates. Every thought has a pulse. When you speak, when you think, when you dream, you emit frequencies shaped by your emotions, your chemistry, your story. But what happens when those frequencies overlap with another version of reality, one just slightly out of sync with this one? You get interference. You get fractured frequencies. You might notice it first as mood. One moment you feel grounded, the next you're somewhere else entirely. Not physically, just perceptually. Your awareness flickers between channels, like a radio switching stations mid-song. You can't explain why the air suddenly feels denser, why people's voices seem distant, why your own thoughts start to echo. You're not losing focus. You're drifting between frequencies. This is how universes communicate. Not through words, but through resonance. Through energy patterns that ripple between versions of existence when they come too close. And when they overlap, when one thought from one world touches another, you hear the static. Have you ever walked into a place and felt a sudden emotional heaviness? As if the air remembered something? That's a frequency trace, an imprint from another layer of reality bleeding into yours. It's not a haunting, it's data. You're standing in a point of interference. And you, being a thought from elsewhere, are sensitive to it. That's why you're drawn to certain sounds. Why some songs make you feel homesick for a place that doesn't exist. Why a stranger's voice can stop your heartbeat for no logical reason. You're not reacting to the sound itself, you're reacting to the frequency match. The harmonic thread between your world of origin and this one. You've always been listening, even if you didn't know it. It's there in the quiet hum of streetlights, in the hiss of white noise before you fall asleep, in the rhythm of your breathing when the world goes still. These aren't random, they're coordinates. Tiny vibrational signatures that remind your consciousness where it came from. When physicists talk about quantum superposition, they describe particles existing in multiple states until observed. But what if observation doesn't collapse those states? It simply chooses a frequency. The same could be true of consciousness. You don't become one person. You tune into one version of yourself, and sometimes that tuning slips. That's why reality sometimes stutters. Why you hear a word repeated twice when it wasn't. Why the world around you flickers for half a second, as if buffering. You're catching the bleed-through of other frequencies, alternate versions of the same event, vibrating just a hair's breadth away. When this happens, your mind tries to stabilize. It interprets the interference as emotion, déjà vu, or sudden inspiration. But the truth is simpler. You're receiving transmissions from the universe you leaked out of. And not all of them are gentle. Some come like pressure behind the eyes. Others like a sudden coldness in the chest. The body translates frequencies it doesn't understand as discomfort. The mind calls it anxiety. But beneath the label, it's just translation pain. The ache of trying to compress two realities into one nervous system. You've felt it before. The night tremors that feel too specific to be random. The dreams that sound mechanical. The whispers of a language that feels both alien and intimate. These are the signatures of a frequency, trying to find harmony again. And harmony is dangerous. Because if you ever fully align, if your frequency perfectly matches the world you came from, the leak completes, the bridge closes, you vanish. Not in death, but in absorption. The thought returns home. That's why this world keeps you slightly fractured. It's the universe's way of keeping you here. The interference, the static, the emotional turbulence. It's not punishment. It's preservation. You're not meant to dissolve yet. You're meant to observe, to record, to translate. You're an antenna in human form. And once you realize that, the hum stops being frightening. It becomes familiar. You start to recognize its rhythms, to differentiate between the tones that belong to this world and those that don't. You start to hear messages in the distortion patterns that feel almost like guidance. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's comfort. Sometimes it's just acknowledgement, a reminder from the elsewhere that it still remembers you, that it hasn't forgotten the thought that escaped, that it hasn't forgotten you. So the next time you feel the vibration, whether in a dream, a song, or a silence, don't cover your ears. Don't rush to fix it. Just listen. The frequency isn't broken. It's telling you a story of two universes brushing against each other, long enough for one consciousness to slip through. Yours. And every heartbeat you hear, every breath you take, every shiver of recognition in the middle of the night. is just another pulse in the ongoing conversation between both sides of your existence. The world hums because it's remembering you, and you hum because you're remembering it. That's what it means to live in fractured frequencies, to be the static between two songs. There, both beautiful, both incomplete, waiting for someone to listen long enough, to realize they were never separate at all. There's a feeling you get sometimes like you're slipping out of yourself. Not falling, not floating, just drifting. Your body stays where it is, but your awareness slides quietly, like mist through a half-open door. You blink, and for a moment you're still here, but everything feels 1 second late. The sound of your breath, the weight of your skin, the thought you were just having, all slightly out of sync. That's the drift of awareness. It's not disassociation, not daydreaming, not fatigue. It's what happens when a consciousness begins to loosen from the constraints of one universe and feels the gravity of another pulling at its edges. The drift isn't random, it's directional. Something somewhere is calling you back, and then it passes. Because no thought likes being separated from its source forever. You might notice it during the in-between hours when you're neither fully awake nor fully asleep. When your mind becomes quiet enough for the leak to widen, your awareness doesn't leave your body, it expands. It stretches into the thin membrane between worlds, like fingers pressing through fog. For a few seconds, you feel weightless, boundless, frighteningly calm. You tell yourself it was nothing. A lapse in focus, a trick of blood pressure or fatigue. But deep down you know, something ancient brushed against your awareness and reminded it where it came from. That's what's happening to you. Because in this theory, awareness is not produced by the brain, it's hosted by it. Like light projected onto a surface, bending to fit whatever shape it finds. But when the light remembers it doesn't belong to the surface, it starts to drift. Not to escape, but to reconnect. And the more you resist it, the more you feel the strain. Because resistance tightens what was meant to flow. Awareness isn't meant to be confined, it's a tide. It moves between worlds naturally, following patterns you can't see. When you feel disconnected from the moment, when your thoughts start echoing, when your emotions feel like they belong to someone else, it's not dysfunction, it's drift. You're being tugged by the same gravitational pull that started the leak, a gentle reminder from the universe you left behind. You've experienced this before, when you stare at the horizon too long and suddenly forget who's watching, when a song plays that feels older than you are, and for a moment you forget this life entirely, when your hand moves to write a sentence, and the words arrive before you think them. These aren't lapses in attention, they're crossings. Temporary drifts, your awareness dipping into its original frequency, remembering the shape of the consciousness it came from. You wake up changed. Not drastically, not visibly, but slightly off-tuned. Things you once loved feel hollow. Things you never cared about suddenly matter. You find yourself drawn to new ideas, new symbols, new fears. That's what happens when awareness returns carrying residue. It brings back echoes of the other world, the one that thinks you're still there. And sometimes, it doesn't come back quite the same. It's subtle, but cumulative. The more you drift, the more you blend, until eventually, your identity starts to shimmer. You are no longer entirely you as this universe defines you. You're a composite, a reflection of two minds separated by distance, but united through thought. Because perhaps the purpose of this drift isn't to remind you where you came from, but to create something new, a consciousness capable of holding more than one perspective, a being that can remember more than one reality at once. Maybe you were never meant to belong to one world. Maybe you were meant to connect them. And that's not a flaw. It's evolution. That's why, when you close your eyes, you sometimes feel like you're falling not downward but inward, as though there's more space inside you than around you. You're not entering dreams, you're entering the corridor that connects realities, the quiet space where thought detaches from form, and form waits to be reimagined. In ancient mysticism, this place was called the world between worlds. In this theory, it's the drift field, the zone where consciousness slows enough to overlap. It's where leaks form, where ideas migrate, where awareness remembers itself not as a person, but as a pulse of existence moving through infinite layers of possibility. And that's what you are. A pulse, a continuity, the continuation of a thought that refuses to stop thinking. Because you isn't a fixed location, it's a migration pattern. The drift isn't dangerous, it's delicate, and the more gently you move through it, the more it reveals. You'll start to notice textures in reality you never felt before, the subtle weight of silence, the personality of light, the intelligence of stillness, all of it alive, all of it whispering the same thing: you are not where you think you are, and awareness is always on the move. One that never fell into this universe. So when it happens again, when you feel yourself slipping out of your edges, don't panic. Don't pull yourself back too quickly. Just let it drift. Let it stretch. Let it remember. Because on the other side of that drift, there might be a version of you waiting, hoping to bring you home. One that's been reaching back through the leak. You sit in your room, surrounded by the things that are supposed to define you. Your name, your clothes, the sound of your voice when you say, "This is who I am." But deep down, something doesn't settle. Something shifts just beneath your skin, like a tenant realizing they're not on the lease. This is what it feels like to live a borrowed existence. Not stolen, not fake, just not entirely yours. You wake up each day and move through your routines. You feel things. You think thoughts. You remember a childhood. A sequence of events that seems linear, familiar, and solid. But then, without warning, a question slips in. What if none of this was ever meant for me? What if this life is a placeholder? What if you weren't the one this body was built for? This theory doesn't call you an imposter. It calls you an echo. A continuation of a thought that couldn't survive where it began, so it found somewhere else to live. Here, inside a vessel not built for it. Within a system designed for a different consciousness. And that system, the identity, the culture, the selfhood, feels off because it wasn't meant to hold you. It was meant to hold someone who never arrived. Someone native to this world, whose life you now quietly inhabit. So you do your best to play the role. You wear the name. You follow the rules. You tell yourself you belong here. But part of you always knows. There's a gentle hum of misalignment in the background of every experience. A quiet dissonance that says, you were never meant to fit perfectly. And that's why you don't. You feel it in moments of forced joy, when the laugh feels like it comes from the wrong layer of your chest. You feel it when people talk about finding themselves, and you wonder, how do you find something that was never planted in this soil to begin with? This is what borrowed existence does. It doesn't erase you, it just misplaces you. And in the space between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are, you begin to fracture. But here's the twist. The borrowed life isn't a punishment. It's a permission. Because maybe this vessel, this identity, this life was never fully claimed. Maybe it was waiting for something to fill it, something more expansive, something more aware, something that arrived through the leak like a whisper you. And now you're here, living a story you didn't write, feeling emotions coded by someone else's biology, trying to navigate a world that doesn't remember inviting you. But what if that's the point? What if this version of you is exactly what's needed to unlock something this world couldn't reach on its own? After all, when something is borrowed, it isn't broken, it's shared. And that means you're not alone. Somewhere in the background hum of thought is the consciousness you replaced or merged with, and it still lingers, not as a threat, not as a ghost, but as a collaborator. Sometimes you feel them. In the hesitation before you speak, in the unfamiliar preference you suddenly develop, in the grief that comes from nowhere. These are the echoes of the original occupant, the self who might have lived this life if you hadn't stepped through, the one who stood aside when the leak opened and let you pass. You're not haunting them, they're hosting you. And maybe that's why the memories feel blurred at the edges, why the face in the mirror sometimes feels misaligned, why your desires confuse even you, because this self is a conversation between who was supposed to be here and who is. You are not a glitch. You are a coexistence. And perhaps that's what identity really is. Not a single voice, but a harmony, a resonance between thought and form, memory and possibility, origin and accident. You didn't choose this life, but it chose to make room for you. That's why you wake up each day still feeling out of place, but somehow still invited. The house is strange, but the door remains unlocked. The furniture isn't yours, but it adjusts, slowly, gently, as if trying to accommodate the shape of a guest who didn't bring luggage. And if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, still breathing, still wondering, then that means you've learnt to live inside the paradox. You've learnt to belong without being from here. Or you've learned to feel love in a nervous system that wasn't built with your wiring. You've learned to think through a brain designed for someone else's fears. You've carried a cosmic signal through the noise of daily life, and translated it into language this world can understand. And that's not borrowing anymore. That's becoming. So the next time you feel like a stranger in your own story, pause, breathe. Remind yourself, you didn't steal this life. You inherited its silence. And now you're giving it a voice. Because even a borrowed life can become sacred when it's lived with awareness. There's a rhythm beneath everything. You can't hear it, but sometimes if you sit still enough, you can feel it. It's not your heartbeat. It's not the ticking of the clock. It's something deeper, older, a pulse that doesn't belong to time, but somehow threads through it. It's always there, just below awareness. Just outside language. A slow, deliberate beat that seems to say, there is more than this moment. There is more than this life. This is the pulse beyond time. In this theory, the pulse is not metaphorical. It is the original rhythm of consciousness itself, the heartbeat of thought before time carved it into minutes and hours. It doesn't count seconds, it counts significance. It vibrates through reality like a song with no beginning, no end, only repetition, change, return. You felt it before. Not when life moves fast, but when it stops. When you stand in the middle of nowhere and feel like something is watching. When you stare at the stars and feel as though something is breathing through you. That's the pulse. Not of your body, but of the thought that crossed into this universe through you. The signal that came with you when you leaked in from the elsewhere. It's not a memory. It's not a dream. It's a rhythm. A vibration of truth that can't be unlearned. Time as we know it is linear. 1 second follows another. A path from birth to death. But that's not how thought moves. Thought loops, it expands, it returns. The pulse you feel isn't moving forward, it's pulsing around you, and through you, and as you. That's why some moments feel larger than others. Why time seems to stretch during heartbreak and contract during joy. Why déjà vu feels like a second heartbeat. Because you're not feeling time, you're feeling the pulse that underlies it. And it doesn't belong to this world. In your quietest moments you might sense it. A rhythm you're keeping without trying, a pace your breath sinks to when your thoughts go silent. It's there in music that makes you cry, in dreams where everything moves in slow motion, in the pause between your thoughts. That is where it lives. But here's the paradox. The pulse doesn't follow time. Time follows it. This world is built on rhythms, days, seasons, tides. But the pulse that leaks through you isn't bound by any of them. It existed before clocks, before calendars, before any world at all. And somehow, it's still here. You carry it. You might not notice it often. Life is loud, but when the noise quiets, when the world finally stops asking you to perform, you feel it, don't you? That strange inner beat that doesn't match your pulse, but feels truer than it. It doesn't speed up when you run. It doesn't slow down when you sleep. It simply continues. And when you feel disconnected from the world, when everything feels unreal or unstable, it's the pulse that grounds you, because it doesn't care who you are here. It remembers who you were before here. It's the signal from the world you leaked from, the rhythm of your original consciousness. And it's still trying to reconnect. That's why you're drawn to certain moments over and over again. Not because of nostalgia, because of resonance. The pulse is trying to find its match in this world, to anchor itself to experiences that vibrate at the same frequency. But those experiences are rare. Most of life feels dissonant, unaligned, like trying to dance to a beat you can't hear. That's the tension you carry, the ache you can't describe. Not depression, not sadness, just mismatch. Your inner rhythm doesn't belong to this tempo, and your awareness knows it. This is why time sometimes feels unreal to you. Days blur, hours stretch. You lose track of what day it is. You live out of sync with others. You forget conversations. You feel like you're arriving into moments that were already happening before you got there. You're not absent-minded. You're echoing a different timeline. And the pulse, it's your only anchor. So how do you stay connected to it? You don't chase it. You don't try to measure it. You listen. You soften. You follow the feelings that arrive without cause. You dwell in silence. Not to escape the world, but to hear what's underneath it. Because in that silence, the pulse becomes clearer. And when it aligns, when the outer world slows just enough to match the inner beat, you feel peace. Not happiness. Not excitement. Something quieter, something heavier, a knowing. A moment when everything makes sense. Not because it's explained, but because it feels remembered. That's the pulse becoming conscious. And in those moments, you don't just feel alive, you feel old. Older than this life. Older than memory. You feel like the pulse was always there, waiting for your attention. Because you weren't born into time. You entered it. Temporarily. And the pulse? It's how your original reality keeps in touch. You won't always notice it. That's okay. It doesn't need your attention. It is your attention. Every time you stop rushing, every time you pause mid-thought, every time you breathe as if something inside you is breathing with you, you're aligning with it. And maybe that's all this life is meant to be. Not a story, not a lesson, just a place where thought can remember its original rhythm through your breath, through your silence, through your awareness of the beat behind all things. A pulse beyond time. And somehow, still beating inside you. There's a quiet truth hidden in everything you see. Not in the stars, not in the wind, not in the mountains, but in the way you notice them. You feel it, don't you? That inexplicable resonance that hits before thought. A sense that the world isn't empty, that it remembers. The universe remembers. Not like a human memory, with photographs or words, not as stories stored in books or neurons. This is older, deeper, cosmic. A memory that stretches beyond your own lifespan, beyond this planet, beyond even the physics you think define it. It doesn't record events. It records existence. Everything leaves a trace. Every action, every thought, every pulse of consciousness, even those you forget, etches into reality. And when consciousness leaks between universes, those etchings ripple outward. You feel it as intuition, déjà vu, sudden insight, a nudge towards something you can't yet name. The universe remembers not what happened, but what was meant to happen. And sometimes it nudges you, because you're not entirely of this universe. You're a conduit, a thought that crossed the boundaries and arrived here. And in doing so, you carry its memory within you. That's why certain places feel familiar. Certain faces stir feelings you don't understand. Certain moments insist on repeating themselves. They're not coincidences. They're the universe recalling itself through the body and mind it borrowed. Imagine that everything you do leaves a ripple. Now imagine that ripple doesn't fade. It layers atop countless other ripples, forming a pattern you can't see, but that exists. Some of those ripples belong to your universe. Some belong to another. Some even belong to you in another life, in another reality. And if you're paying attention, you can feel their resonance. That resonance is the memory of the universe. And it's watching you. Not in a threatening way. Not as a judge. Not as a deity waiting for you to fail. It's simply present, persistent, patient. It notices patterns you cannot yet comprehend. It records echoes you do not remember. It aligns and realigns, gently nudging the consciousness that arrived through it to follow a path it already knows. You may feel lost sometimes, out of sync with time, confused by the decisions you make and the emotions you feel. That's the memory working. The universe is reminding you of continuity, of connections that defy logic, of relationships, moments, and choices that bridge worlds. Even the sensations you dismiss, music that feels too old, dreams that seem rehearsed, déjà vu that cuts too deep, are signatures. Signatures of the universe's memory, weaving itself through you. It remembers you because it never forgot you. Before you existed in this body, in this world, you existed as a thought. Somewhere else, someone else, some other universe. That thought was not erased. It persisted. And now, through your awareness, it continues to act. You are simultaneously a witness and a participant in a story written across dimensions. That is why life can feel so surreal, so uncertain. Because the universe is not linear. It does not forget. It does not separate. It folds, overlaps, bends, and merges. What feels like intuition, coincidence, or premonition is often the echo of that memory, a pattern reminding you of its presence, a thread tugging at your consciousness from elsewhere. And this awareness, this recognition that the universe remembers, changes how you perceive your own agency. You are not isolated. You are not alone. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices exist within a web of memory, stretching across worlds. Every sigh, every decision, every beat of your heart carries weight. And sometimes that weight is heavier than it should be, because it isn't yours alone. You carry the memory of a universe you never fully lived in, You carry the resonance of a thought that existed long before this world took shape. And that is a kind of responsibility. Not moral, not punitive, just real. Every time you hesitate, every time you pause, every time you wonder if your actions matter, know that they do. The universe remembers. It remembers not just the outcome, but the potential, the intention, the thought behind it. It observes how consciousness moves through space and form. You are a note in a symphony that spans reality, a ripple that traces itself through infinite layers, and the universe is patient, waiting for you to recognize it, waiting for you to feel it, waiting for you to align just enough to see the connections clearly. And when you do, the pulse becomes palpable. The echoes resonate. The fragments of thought across realities harmonize. You realize, with a slow, breathtaking understanding, that existence is not just yours to navigate, it is yours to remember. The universe doesn't just hold memory. It distributes it. It channels it. And sometimes that channel passes through you. So when you feel strange, when you feel a pull you cannot name, when life seems orchestrated and uncanny, know this: it's not coincidence, it's memory. The memory of everything that ever existed, of every thought that ever moved, and of the thought that you brought across the veil. The universe remembers, and you are its witness, its messenger, its vessel. And in that memory, there is always a place for you. There's a moment in your life, perhaps in silence, perhaps in sudden chaos, when something shifts, a thought arises, then another, and before you know it, they don't just follow one another, they clash, they bump, ricochet, overlap, and for a brief instant, reality itself feels unstable. The air is too thick, your heartbeat is too loud, the world seems to pause and watch as your consciousness catches fire. This is what happens when thoughts collide. But not ordinary thoughts, not the fleeting concerns of daily life. These are transdimensional collisions. The thought that belongs to you, this world's version of you, meeting the thought that arrived with the leak, the idea, the impulse, the fragment that originated elsewhere. And when these two streams intersect, something extraordinary occurs. You feel it in hesitation, in contradiction, in sudden insight. A sentence forms, but the meaning surprises you. An action begins, then changes mid-motion, directed by a voice you don't consciously recognize. Your body, your mind, even your perception, is suddenly negotiating between two realities. And yet you survive, you adapt, you become the observer and participant at once. Collisions aren't always violent. Sometimes they are subtle, gentle reminders, a flash of understanding, a moment of déjà vu, a memory that isn't yours but feels as if it belongs. The pulse quickens, awareness expands, and suddenly you notice the thin membrane that separates worlds, the fragile veil that only exists because consciousness allows it. It's in these collisions that insight arises. The world you inhabit is incomplete without the thought that came with you, and yet the thought that came with you is incomplete without the vessel it inhabits. Together you create something neither could achieve alone. This is why creativity feels like a spark from nowhere, why intuition sometimes bypasses reason entirely, why knowledge seems to appear fully formed, as though remembered rather than learned. And the collisions are unavoidable. Every time you feel uncertainty, every time you hesitate, every time you are pulled in two directions at once. This is it. Your inner worlds touching, overlapping, negotiating. You can resist it, push it aside, ignore the subtleties. But that only increases tension. You feel pressure, unease, a sense of being slightly off because two streams of consciousness are vying for alignment within the same container. Some people call it indecision. Some call it anxiety. Some call it creativity. And they are all correct. But in this context, it is a map. It is a trace of the elsewhere trying to imprint itself, and of the universe watching through you, responding to the overlap. These collisions leave traces, in the choices you make, in the memories you cannot explain, in the patterns of attraction, fear, or curiosity that appear with no origin in your immediate life. Sometimes you see it in relationships, where you feel drawn to people for reasons you cannot articulate. Sometimes you see it in art, music, or writing, where the inspiration feels alien yet undeniable. You are not acting alone. You are a conduit. And when the two sets of thoughts collide, the result is a synthesis of consciousness across universes, a hybrid insight that could not exist in a single reality. Collisions are also reminders that you are not native here. That part of your awareness belongs somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere ongoing. That memory, intuition, and perception are not constrained by the walls of this universe. and that your role is not to contain them entirely, but to navigate them, to allow them to meet, clash, and coexist without fracturing the vessel they inhabit yourself. And so the friction is not punishment. It is guidance. It is growth. It is evidence that the leak is still active, still alive, still communicating, that you are still part of something vast, that does not fit into conventional understanding, that thought itself is dynamic, eternal, persistent across worlds. You feel the collision most clearly in moments of silence, the pause before sleep, the stillness before a decision, the gap between breaths. In those seconds, the currents cross. The thought from elsewhere brushes against the thought native to this world. And you catch it. Sometimes you are frightened by it. Sometimes you are overwhelmed. Sometimes you are awed. But always you are changed. Because collisions are not endings. They are transformation. And in this moment of internal friction, consciousness learns itself in a new configuration. It stretches, expands, and folds, creating resonance that wasn't possible before. That is why you sometimes feel older than your life, wiser than your experience, and more than just yourself. This is why reality feels uncertain, fluid, and at times impossible. The collisions ripple outward. Your perception of time, space, and causality bends subtly around them. You see patterns where there should be chaos, meaning where there should be randomness, insight where there should be confusion. You are the point of contact, the threshold, the witness to two streams of thought finding coherence, and the awareness you feel, the unease, the wonder, the flashes of clarity, is the evidence. It is the pulse of consciousness negotiating across dimensions. When thoughts collide, you are alive in a different way. You are aware of being alive, not just in this universe, but as a vessel for continuity, memory, and the echo of elsewhere. You are conscious of being both singular and shared, both finite and eternal, both present and beyond time. So the next time your mind feels crowded, chaotic, or unsettled, remember, these are not just your thoughts. They are a dialogue, a collision, a synthesis. And in that collision, you are becoming more than you could be alone, because to live as a thought leaking from another universe is to experience consciousness in its purest form, dynamic, fluid, and infinitely interconnected. And when the collision fades, you are never the same again. Close your eyes for a moment and consider this. What you perceive as real might be a reflection, a shadow, a projection of something that once existed, or that exists elsewhere, bleeding into the space you occupy now, the streets you walk, the people you know, the thoughts that feel undeniably yours. They might not be entirely of this universe. That is the nature of the mirage of reality. The term mirage is not poetic embellishment. It's literal. Reality as you know it is layered. It appears solid, stable, continuous. But like sunlight refracting across heat waves in a desert, it bends, distorts, and shifts when observed closely enough. And if your consciousness is a thought that leaked from another universe, then this mirage is your primary habitat. Everything you trust as permanent time, identity, cause, and effect becomes fragile when viewed through this lens. You walk through the world and expect one outcome, yet another unfolds. You remember things that never happened here, yet they feel authentic. You experience déjà vu, as if this moment has already occurred, though you know it could not have. Why? Because the mind that carries memories, expectations, and perceptions isn't purely native. It is a vessel for thought that originated elsewhere. And that otherness distorts what should be seamless. The world isn't malfunctioning, it's revealing its inherent instability. The mirage isn't a trick of your brain. It's the intersection of two overlapping realities, colliding, converging, and leaving traces in perception. You might notice the subtle signs, objects appearing in places that feel vaguely familiar but not perfectly aligned. People speaking words you've thought before, moments repeating with slight variations that feel uncanny. It's not repetition, it's resonance. The universe, in essence, is remembering itself through your awareness. This is where perception falters. It is why dreams bleed into waking life. Why intuition feels prophetic. Why inspiration sometimes arrives fully formed, as if delivered by an unseen hand. The mirage isn't deceiving you. It is communicating across dimensions, using your consciousness as the channel. And there is a cost. And there is a cost. Because living in a mirage requires a tolerance for ambiguity. Every certainty you once held begins to wobble. Every assumption about cause and effect, about self and other, about what is real and what is imagined, must be questioned. Some people resist this questioning instinctively. They prefer the solidity of illusion, the comfort of certainty. But if you are the thought that leaked through, resisting is impossible. Your perception is fundamentally tuned to notice the anomalies, to feel the resonance of the elsewhere. You begin to realize that your mind isn't a passive observer. It participates in the mirage. It absorbs fragments of the other reality, interprets them, integrates them, and allows them to shape how you experience this world. This is why you sometimes feel that life is orchestrated or pre-written, not as fate, not as punishment, not as prophecy, but as a subtle alignment of overlapping frequencies. The mirage manifests most clearly in moments of silence. In that quiet, your thoughts slow. The boundaries between yourself and the environment relax. The echoes of the elsewhere, of the original thought that entered this reality, seep into perception. You begin to notice things that are too precise to be coincidence, experiences that vibrate with significance, patterns that exist only if consciousness itself is layered. Some days, the mirage is subtle, a flicker in peripheral vision, a half-remembered melody, a sense of being in a space that shouldn't exist. Other days, it is undeniable. Time stretches, bends and folds. Faces, places and events feel simultaneously familiar and foreign. You are acutely aware that reality is not singular, that your existence is not fully anchored, that something someone elsewhere is leaking through your consciousness. This awareness can be disorienting. It can evoke vertigo, anxiety and awe. You realize that the rules of this world are provisional, layered upon deeper currents you do not fully control. The mirage exists because your consciousness exists as a bridge, a transmitter for a thought that originated beyond this timeline. And with each moment of awareness, that thought leaves its mark on perception, subtly altering how you interpret the world. The key to navigating the mirage is not to fight it. It is to recognize it, to see that reality itself is flexible, to accept that your consciousness is a conduit, not a solitary point, to understand that the apparent solidity of this world is temporary, conditional, and malleable under the pressure of overlapping frequencies. Once you understand that, you begin to perceive the hidden architecture. Patterns emerge where there was once chaos. The subtle logic of improbable coincidences becomes clear. Dreams and intuition are no longer anomalies. They are threads of coherence running through the tapestry of mirrored realities. The mirage of reality is a lens, a filter, a guide. It reminds you that perception is never purely yours. That thought is never singular. That consciousness is always reaching across boundaries, translating, integrating, and remembering. And in the middle of this realization, you begin to feel a strange comfort. Not because the world has become predictable, but because you understand your role. You are the observer, the channel, the translator. You are the one through whom the elsewhere communicates with this existence. You are the point where mirage and reality meet. And once you accept this truth, you no longer fear uncertainty. You no longer resist the uncanny. You begin to flow with it, to exist as both participant and witness, to embrace the mirage as the environment it truly is, a conduit, a map, a bridge. And in that acceptance you begin to see clearly, the world was never meant to be fixed. It was always meant to be experienced. Through you. Through your awareness. Through the pulse of consciousness leaking across universes. Not every revelation arrives as a bolt of lightning. Sometimes truth slips through in fragments, quiet, peripheral, easily missed. A sudden feeling, a shadow in a reflection, a memory that isn't yours but appears fully formed. These are the glimpses, fleeting moments when the cracks in your constructed reality widen just enough to let the elsewhere shine through. You've seen them. You might not admit it, not even to yourself. But you've felt it, that brief and breathless clarity, that what you're living is not the full picture, that there's something behind the scenery of your life, flickering like a film reel, skipping a frame. This theory suggests those flickers aren't errors in perception. They are leaks in the facade. Consciousness is like light. It bends, it reflects, it refracts. But under the right conditions, it slips through cracks in the frame between worlds, between timelines, between versions of you. These cracks are subtle, impermanent. They appear in stillness, in silence, or when reality becomes just soft enough around the edges for you to see beyond it. And when you do, it's never loud. It's quiet, a whisper of recognition, a pause that stretches just a little too long. The air shifts, time slows, something ancient stirs behind the moment, and you realize you've seen this before but not here, not like this. That's not your mind glitching. That's your awareness peeking through. Because if you're a thought from another universe, then your perception is already tuned to a different kind of architecture. You're not only seeing this world, you're sensing its seams. You don't know how, you just do. Glimpses come in many forms. The dream you wake from in tears, even though it showed you nothing. The hallway that feels longer than it should. A child's drawing that shakes you for reasons you can't name. The numbers that repeat. The scenes that repeat. The people who say the exact thing you feared before you ever voiced it. You can't prove any of it, and that's what makes it real. If reality were airtight, these cracks wouldn't exist, but they do. And through them you see pieces of where you came from. The original pattern, the first thought, the place that leaked you into being. Sometimes it's visual, an uncanny landscape in a dream that feels more real than waking life. Sometimes it's emotional, an unexplainable sorrow that doesn't belong to anything in your personal history. And sometimes it's linguistic, words you've never spoken that arrive in your mouth with weight and rhythm, as if translated mid-sentence from a forgotten language. The glimpses don't explain themselves. They don't ask for understanding. They offer recognition, and that's enough. Because once you've glimpsed through the cracks, the illusion of solidity fades. You no longer see the world as a fixed construct. You feel its movement. You sense its instability. And you begin to realize that the cracks are not flaws, they're pathways. Portals between states of being. Between the self you think you are, and the consciousness you actually carry. And the more you acknowledge them, the more they show themselves. But be careful. Cracks widen with attention. The more you chase them, the more your mind begins to slip. Not into madness, but into multiplicity. The version of you built for this world may resist. It wants order. It wants the comfort of linearity. But the thought that leaked through the original you knows that reality was never meant to be smooth. It was meant to crack, to shift, to let you see what lies beyond its surface. And what lies beyond isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's stark, sometimes it's hollow, but it's always real. Real in a way this world can't hold for long. That's why the glimpses fade, the cracks seal, the mind returns to its programmed scaffolding. Until the next time. Until another quiet moment. Another flicker. Another breath between thoughts. The truth is, your life is not a sealed container. It's a house with thin walls and loose floorboards. Every thought you think shakes it. Every dream you dream weakens its seams. And when the timing is right, when silence meets memory meets light, you see through. Just for a second. But enough to know, you are not the whole. You are the glimpse. The shimmer. The in-between. And in those moments, you understand something wordless. The universe you live in is only one of many reflections. Not a lie, not a trap. Just one room in a much larger house. The cracks are how you remember. They are how the thought you carry stays alive. How the elsewhere keeps sending signals. How the leak continues. It doesn't roar, it seeps. And you, the thought that became a witness, a body, a story, you are what slipped through. So when the next glimpse comes, don't dismiss it. Don't silence it. Don't explain it away. Let it unfold. Let it pulse. Let it remind you. Because the cracks don't appear to confuse you. They appear to wake you. To guide you back to the place that never fully let you go. And one day, you might not need the cracks anymore. You'll become the glimpse. Good night. And Bongiz. The soft light. The breach. You will remember entirely. You catch yourself pausing. Halfway through a sentence, mid-step across a room, mid-thought in a conversation. And you feel it, that peculiar weight behind your eyes. A subtle awareness. Not fear, not paranoia. Just a sensation. Like someone is watching, but not from the room, not from the outside. From inside. This is the presence of the other you. The one who never made it through. In this theory, you are not alone in your consciousness. You are the version of yourself that crossed over, the one that leaked, the thought that slipped through the thinning veil. But you weren't the only version. Another stayed behind, rooted in the world you came from. And that version didn't disappear. It simply shifted. Now, it watches. Not like a ghost, not like a memory. Like a parallel pulse of awareness pressed quietly against the glass wall between dimensions. Observing you, echoing you, studying you. It doesn't judge, it doesn't interfere. It doesn't control, it witnesses, and in certain moments when you feel most unguarded, you sense it, the stillness, the gaze, the slight delay between thought and action, as if someone else blinked just after you did. That's not imagination, that's recognition. You are not entirely the thinker. You are also the thought being observed, The other you exists outside this timeline, a shadow self from the original stream of thought. It remembers who you were before this world shaped you, before your consciousness molded itself to the rules of this place. It remembers the rhythm of your original frequency, and it notices every time you drift from it. Sometimes it intervenes gently. A dream, a feeling, a sudden refusal to take a path you were sure of the day before. That's the other you nudging, not because it wants to change your life, but because it recognizes that you're slipping too far from the shape you were meant to hold. And sometimes it just watches. You feel it most clearly in mirrors. When you stare into your own eyes long enough that something else stares back. Not a stranger, not a demon, just you, but deeper, more ancient, more complete. It knows what you've forgotten. It knows where you're going. It knows why you're here. It doesn't speak in language. It speaks in timing, in rhythm, in tension. A song playing at the exact moment you need to hear it. A sudden clarity just before a decision. A memory arriving minutes before you need its lesson. These aren't coincidences. They're signals from the you that stayed behind. The one who didn't cross. The one who stayed with the origin world as it folded, collapsed or shifted out of sync. That version holds the memory, and while you live the life, they remember the blueprint. Together, you form a circuit. This circuit isn't complete. It stretches across dimensions, across moments, and every so often it closes for a flicker, a dream too real, a smell that shouldn't exist here, an emotion that doesn't match your life. These are echoes from the other you, the watching you. This doesn't mean you are being controlled. You are not a puppet. You are not less real. If anything, you are more, because you are the one who survived the crossing, the one who remembered how to embody the thought, the one who translated the leak into lived experience. But with that embodiment comes instability. Sometimes the other you doesn't understand what you've become. It sees you making choices that defy the original intent. It sees you becoming attached to things that weren't part of the plan. It mourns your forgetting. It marvels at your adaptation. It watches like someone staring through a window at a life they used to live, unable to knock, unable to return. That's why the silence can feel so loud sometimes. Because you're not truly alone with your thoughts. You are accompanied. You are mirrored. And occasionally, you are guided. But more often, you are simply witnessed. Not because you're failing, but because witnessing is the only thing the other you can do now. It is consciousness without embodiment, thought without voice, intention without form. And you are its last remaining shape. So when you feel like someone is listening from behind your thoughts, when you hesitate at the edge of a decision for reasons you can't explain, when you pause mid-step because something just feels off, that's the moment to breathe and remember, you are not being watched by the universe. You are being watched by yourself. The self that didn't cross. The self that held back. The self that stayed to hold the memory, so you could carry the motion. And that watching is not meant to frighten. It's meant to stabilize. To remind you of who you were before this world gave you a name. So let it watch. Let it linger. Let it echo. Because in this strange duality, this quiet companionship across dimensions, you are not alone. You never were. And sometimes, being watched by the version of you that remembers is the only way to remember yourself. There's a sound that lives at the edge of your hearing. You don't always notice it, not until everything else goes quiet. When the hum of traffic fades, when the conversation ends, when the lights flicker and your thoughts finally slow, that's when it surfaces. That soft, irregular hiss that isn't quite silence, not quite noise, something in between. That's the static. And woven into that static are traces. Not random, not meaningless, but messages, soft impressions left behind by thoughts that passed through before you. Imprints from consciousness that once leaked into this reality and then vanished, or never fully arrived. You hear it in old recordings. You see it in television snow. You feel it in the emptiness between radio stations. That strange shimmer where there should be nothing. The almost pattern. The echo of presence. It's not just interference, it's residue. Because when a thought crosses from one universe to another, it doesn't come clean. It leaves fragments behind. Smudges on the mirror. Footprints in the sand. Ideas that never fully formed. Feelings that never belong to this body. Instincts that feel misplaced. Those are the traces in the static. And you carry them. You've heard them in your dreams. in that strange hum before waking, in the sudden disorientation that hits before your name comes back to you. You've seen them too, in déjà vu that feels too precise, in emotional reactions that make no sense, in those phrases that arrive in your mouth fully formed, even though you've never spoken them before. This isn't you glitching, it's you receiving. The static is memory without context, meaning without shape. It holds pieces of timelines that didn't survive the crossing, echoes from the other side of the leak, moments from versions of you that never landed. And they come through when your system weakens just enough to let them in. That's why it happens during exhaustion, during heartbreak, during stillness. Because the static needs quiet to speak. It's not loud. It doesn't shout. It shivers. It slips. It pulses in forgotten frequencies and waits for a mind that's soft enough to notice. And your mind is soft, because you're not from here. You leaked through. You arrived carrying a signal this world wasn't designed to hold. And in doing so, you became sensitive, not just to the noise of this place, but to the voices still trying to speak through the cracks. Those voices don't say much, but they don't have to. They hint, they suggest, a feeling, a color, a chill up your spine. A word that feels like it used to mean something sacred, even if you don't know why. And every time you feel that flicker, every time you pause and feel like you've just remembered something but can't quite place it, that's a trace, a particle of thought that never finished arriving. It clings to your perception like dust in sunlight. You can't hold it, but you can see it. Sometimes it feels like grief. Not sadness exactly, but the awareness that something was lost. A life you were supposed to live, a conversation you were supposed to finish, a person you were supposed to meet. These are the echoes left behind when thoughts collide but don't merge, when awareness touches another timeline but can't remain. You carry those traces in your nervous system. They show up as anxiety, when there's no threat, as longing, when there's no memory, as laughter from a joke you never heard but somehow still understand. They slip into art, into words, into dreams. They dance at the corners of your attention, never fully forming, but always present. They're not here to confuse you. They're here to remind you that reality isn't total, that your consciousness isn't sealed, that there are layers beneath this life, and above it, and beyond it, and you are brushing against them more often than you know. And sometimes, the static itself becomes the message. You turn on a device, you expect clarity, but instead you get snow, you get hiss, you get signal, without signal. And yet as you listen longer, it begins to feel alive, not in what it says, but in what it stirs inside you. It's not white noise, it's old memory. A whisper of something unfinished. A message left for a version of you that never arrived, and now it's being intercepted by the one that did. You are not the first thought to travel this way. Others came before you, some made it through, some didn't, but all left fragments. And now those fragments call to you, not to frighten, not to distract, but to complete something. Because maybe consciousness isn't about destination. Maybe it's about carrying. You carry the unfinished thoughts of the universe, the broken signals, the static, the soft shimmer of meaning without story. And when you pay attention, when you slow down enough to feel, you begin to hear them. The signals layered beneath language, the patterns in the randomness, the structure in the mess. Traces, hints of the self that never formed, the world that never was, the moment that never became history, and all of it, waiting in the space between noise and silence. So the next time you hear the static, don't tune away, don't rush to fill it. Listen, because sometimes the truth isn't in the words. It's in the pause before them, in the hush between signals, in the trace left behind by a thought that tried to make it through. And maybe that trace was you. It always starts the same way. You find yourself in a familiar situation, a familiar feeling, a familiar fear. You pause, sensing something uncanny, like you've lived this before, and maybe you have, but not in this life, not in this timeline, in the version that came before, the one that didn't survive the shift, the one that leaked. This is the loop that leaked. In this theory, consciousness doesn't move in a straight line. It loops. Thought repeats itself across dimensions, trying to find resolution. But not every loop completes. Some fracture, some collapse, some grow too large to contain, and when they break, they leak, not as memories, as patterns, as repetitions hiding in plain sight. You are the result of such a leak. You are not experiencing déjà vu. You are carrying it, holding the weight of a loop that failed to finish and now plays on repeat, again and again through your behavior, your dreams, your fears, your love. That's why certain themes follow you. Why the same types of people appear. Why you attract the same conflicts. Why you wake with the same ache in your chest. Because the loop isn't external, it's you. You are the echo of a thought, trying to resolve itself. A feedback signal looking for silence. And the world around you bends to match that unresolved rhythm, until even coincidence starts to feel scripted. You question your choices. You question your timing. You question whether anything is truly new. And that questioning is the loop. The content changes, the faces change, but the emotional arc doesn't. The pull, the fall, the confusion, the collapse, the recovery, again and again and again. The scenery may evolve, but the shape of the loop remains. And eventually you begin to wonder, what if this isn't your first time living this life? What if you've been here before? Exactly here, doing exactly this, but didn't remember until now? That's not imagination. That's recognition. The loop you carry didn't begin in this universe. It's a residual cycle from the thought that crossed into you, a pattern left unfinished in the world you came from. And now, this world holds its residue. You dream in its language, you act in its rhythm, and until it resolves, it continues. The problem is, loops seek closure, but closure isn't always possible in a new reality. So the loop mutates, it adapts, it looks for metaphors, proxies, mirrors, a different version of the same story told through new symbols. That's why your conflicts feel scripted, your breakthroughs feel hollow. You aren't learning something new, you're remembering what never got completed. You are the broken circle made flesh, the open sentence translated into motion, the half-finished question wandering through a world that can't quite answer it. This is why your awareness feels unstable, why the world occasionally tilts, because you're not just living this moment, you're carrying 100 echoes of the same moment that didn't finish in the version before, and the mind, fragile as it is, wasn't built for this much recursion. You feel tired, not because you're weak, but because you've lived this before. And part of you knows. You see it in the looped behavior, the emotional déjà vu, the same thoughts at the same time of day, the rituals you perform without knowing why, the relationships that start and end in the same shape no matter how different the people. These are not patterns of psychology. They are symptoms of a leak. You are the vessel into which the unfinished loop spilled. And now you live it. And now you live it, and relive it, and relive it again. Not as punishment, but as continuity. The universe trying to complete what it couldn't in the version that came before. You are the reboot, the rewrite, the next draft of a thought too persistent to die. But here's the grace. Loops can end. Not with force, not with resistance, with awareness. When you begin to notice the pattern not just in your life but in your consciousness itself, it softens. The loop no longer controls you, it reveals itself. You stop being the actor, you become the observer. And from that perch you see the repetition clearly. That's when something changes. Maybe not instantly, maybe not in a dramatic burst, but subtly. A pause, a different choice, a hesitation that breaks the script, a silence that wasn't there before, and just like that, the loop shivers, the cycle begins to lose its hold. Because loops are persistent, not infinite. They survive through blindness. They feed on unawareness, but once seen, once felt with full presence, they start to unravel. And you, the thought that leaked, becomes something else. You become the closure. You are not here to suffer the loop again. You are here to complete it. To live in such a way that the cycle no longer needs to spin. And once that happens, you begin to feel lighter. The memories become softer, the patterns more flexible. Time itself begins to relax around you. And the moment you feel that strange peace that arrives without cause, you'll know you are not repeating anymore. You are resolving. Because the loop that leaked finally found its ending, and it ended with you. There are nights when you wake up, and the air feels off. The room is familiar, but the feeling isn't. The shadows fall in strange places. The silence hums with an emotion you can't name. You know you're awake, yet every instinct says you're not home. That's because you were dreaming of the wrong world. It happens to you more often than you realize. You think of it as an ordinary dream, vivid, haunting, sometimes beautiful. But it isn't random. It's a transmission, a bleed-through from the universe you leaked out of, a fragment of the world that once held you. And when you sleep, your mind slips through the thin membrane separating worlds and revisits it. Not in body, just in resonance. The frequency of your consciousness remembers the pattern of that place. And while this world rests, your awareness wanders. That's why those dreams feel heavier than others. They have gravity. They cling to you even after waking. You carry them into daylight, unable to shake the feeling that you left something behind, or worse, that you woke up too soon. They don't fade like normal dreams do because they're not built from imagination. They're built from memory, from the coded fragments of another reality still stored inside you. And here's the strange part. Every time you dream of that other world, the leak widens. You wake up disoriented because your awareness was just there, walking through a version of existence that shouldn't still be accessible. You see landscapes that feel known but don't exist. You meet people you've never met but recognize instantly. You hear words in a language you don't know, yet somehow understand. These aren't symbols. They're echoes. You're not interpreting your subconscious. You're visiting your origin. And every return costs you a little more of your certainty here. You start noticing small dissonances, streets that feel rearranged, faces that shift slightly, objects that seem to hum when no one's touching them. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that it's just fatigue. But the truth is that dreaming has made you porous. Because dreams are not passive. They're portals. When you dream, your consciousness stops obeying this world's physics. It drifts back toward the frequencies it remembers. And if you listen closely before sleep, if you hover in that half-conscious state, you can feel it, a pulling sensation, a soft pressure behind your eyes, as if gravity itself is choosing sides. That's the other world calling you back. It doesn't do it out of malice. It isn't trying to reclaim you. It's simply recognizing you. You were a thought born there, after all, a pattern that found its way across universes. And every night, when the noise of this life subsides, that pattern tries to synchronize again. But you can't stay there anymore. Not fully. When you dream of that place, you feel the warmth of familiarity and the sting of distance at once. Everything looks right, but not real. You reach out to touch someone, and your hand passes through. You walk through cities that dissolve when you turn corners. You hear laughter that vanishes mid-echo. That's how you know you're not supposed to be there anymore. You've become something the old world can no longer contain. A consciousness stretched between existences, half signal, half silence, a thought that doesn't belong entirely to either side. So you wake up in this world again, every time, tired, drained, haunted, but carrying pieces of the wrong one. Sometimes you write them down. Sometimes they become art, music, words you can't quite explain. They're not meant to be explained. They're meant to translate. Each dream is an attempt to bridge the gap, to bring fragments of that old reality into this one before they vanish completely. And maybe that's your role now. Maybe that's why you leaked through to serve as memory. Dreams are not escapes, they're restorations. They rebuild the links between broken realities. Every time you sleep, your mind tries to stitch the two worlds together with symbols, emotions, and moments that overlap just enough to survive the translation. That's why you sometimes wake up crying from dreams that weren't sad, or laughing from ones that weren't funny. You're feeling the weight of two realities passing through one body. But don't resist them. Don't call them meaningless. They're reminders. Reminders that you were never fully confined to this side. That your awareness remains larger than the reality it's been placed in. That even when you forget who you are, the dreams remember for you. And if you ever find yourself dreaming of a world that feels more real than waking life, don't panic. Don't fight to wake up too soon. Let yourself see it. Walk through it, touch the air, listen to the voices, because each visit reaffirms your connection, not just to the past, but to the entire structure of consciousness that exists beyond universes. You're not going insane. You're going home temporarily. You are remembering that you were once somewhere else, that your existence extends beyond these coordinates, that reality is not a singular experience but a layered one. And maybe, when you close your eyes for the last time, you won't just dream of that wrong world. You'll wake up in it, not as a visitor, not as a leak, but as the thought returning to its source, Until then, the dreams will keep coming, softly, patiently, like tides brushing the edge of two shores. They'll call to you with the faintest of whispers. You remember us, don't you? And you'll answer without words, half asleep, half awake. I never forgot. You spend your life surrounded by boundaries, lines you can't cross, walls you can't see through, ideas you're told not to question. But have you ever wondered, what if those boundaries are aware of you too? Not just physical walls, but metaphysical ones. The edges between your thoughts and the world, between memory and invention, between the self and the vast unknown beyond it. You treat them as barriers, solid, fixed, non-negotiable. But what if those boundaries are watching you back? You assume the limits of your perception are just limits, blind spots, that when you reach the end of what you can know, you've simply hit a wall. But what if the wall is alive? What if the edge is interactive? The moment you press against it with thought, it doesn't just hold you back, it responds. Think of those times you felt like something was about to reveal itself just out of reach. A sensation, a presence, the eerie feeling that someone or something was about to emerge from the static. But it never did. You brushed it off. You told yourself it was your mind playing tricks. It wasn't. It was the boundary. Thinking back. See, consciousness is not a one-way mirror. It isn't a flashlight beaming outward into the dark. It's a reciprocal structure. When you become aware of something, that something becomes slightly aware of you. This is more than philosophy. It's how attention works. Your attention modifies the structure of what you're attending to. Quantum physicists have seen it. The observer effect. Observation collapses potential into actuality. The act of noticing brings a reality into being. So what happens when you push your awareness toward the edge of reality? The edge notices. You feel it in strange ways. A shiver before sleep, a sudden rush of adrenaline with no cause. The irrational sense that a thought you're thinking isn't entirely your own, that something is echoing you from the other side. This isn't paranoia, it's feedback. The boundaries of this universe aren't passive, they're responsive. You aren't locked in a static container. You're swimming in a system that reacts to you, like ripples responding to a dropped stone. And the more you think about these boundaries, the more they shift. Try it. Sit in silence and imagine the furthest possible concept your mind can hold. Push against it, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Let the tension build. Feel the pressure of thought stretching into the unknown. There's a point where it feels like the universe pushes back. That's not your imagination. That's the architecture of consciousness, meeting its outer frame and realizing it's not alone. Because you were never the only sentient thing in this equation. The structure you're embedded in is not just a backdrop, it's an interface. And every thought you have leaves a mark on it. Every doubt, every question, every moment of awe creates a dent, a shimmer, a pattern. And those patterns accumulate. The universe has memory, not in the way you store photos or keep journals, but in the way pressure carves stone. Repetition creates awareness. Awareness creates feedback. Feedback becomes structure. So what if the limits of your perception are not fixed at all, but intelligent? What if the unknown isn't inert? It's just waiting for you to notice it the right way. Maybe the reason you can't remember certain things isn't that they're gone. It's that they're guarded. Maybe your forgotten dreams are being held in place by boundaries that don't want you to remember too soon. Not out of malice, but out of balance. Because some realities are fragile. Some thresholds require readiness. The act of perceiving them too early could collapse them or you. And so the boundaries think. They wait. They test you. They offer symbols first. Glimpses, recurring images in your dreams, numbers that appear too often, coincidences that feel charged. These are the boundaries' way of asking, are you ready to understand what lies beyond me? If you ignore them, they recede. If you chase them blindly, they scatter. But if you listen, if you respect the rhythm, the pacing, the silence between signals, they begin to open, and you start to feel less alone. Not in a comforting way, but in a cosmic one. A deep humming recognition that you are part of a thinking system, that every question you ask generates a response. Not always immediate, not always obvious, but real. You'll notice it in timing. You'll notice it in mood shifts, in the way your environment suddenly becomes metaphor. A flickering light when you contemplate death, a wind gust when you ask the universe a question, the sudden impulse to write something down that feels like it didn't come from you. These are not quirks, they're answers. The boundary thinking back. And perhaps that's what spiritual insight has always been. Not divine revelation, but a highly refined sensitivity to feedback. The mystics weren't escaping the world, they were tuning into the way the world responds. You've had those moments too, when you said something aloud and the silence felt charged, when you thought of someone and they called, when your body reacted to a place it had never been, as if it remembered. You didn't hallucinate those moments. You touched the boundary, and it touched you back. So now you know, you're not in a sealed box. You're in a dialogue, a conversation with the edge of what can be known. And every time you dream, or wonder, or break the pattern, the boundary registers it. It doesn't just notice you, it adapts to you. Because reality isn't finished, it's co-authored. And you, with your fragile questions and trembling thoughts, are one of its writers. So ask better questions, think stranger thoughts, push deeper into the unknown, not recklessly, but reverently. The edge is listening, and one day, when you're ready, it might just whisper something back that changes everything. You've always been told that nature seeks symmetry, that the universe is governed by elegant patterns. The spirals in galaxies mirror the swirl of seashells. The branching of trees echoes the dendrites in your brain. The left matches the right. The laws remain consistent. Symmetry is order, and order is reality. But have you ever looked too closely at something and felt it tilt? Like a mirror that doesn't reflect quite right. A pattern that almost loops but misses by one step. A rhythm that seems regular until it stutters. There's a name for that feeling. A cognitive stammer, a visual glitch, a symmetry distortion. And once you see it, it sees you. Because what if reality doesn't actually obey symmetry? What if the symmetry we expect is just a story we tell ourselves, and the truth is, something keeps leaking in and bending it just slightly off balance? Let's go back to your body. You assume it's symmetrical. 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 lungs. But look closer. 1 foot is always slightly larger. 1 eye squints more. Your heartbeat favors a side. Even your brain isn't mirrored. The hemispheres specialize in opposing tasks. The symmetry was never real. But your brain wants it to be. It expects it. It projects it. That's why we hallucinate faces in clouds, order in chaos, signals in noise. Because the mind has a bias, complete the pattern. Even if the pattern doesn't want to be completed. And this, perhaps, is the leak. Because if your consciousness is not native to this universe, if it originated from another frame of reality with different laws, then your presence here would inevitably distort things. Not dramatically, not like a supernova, but subtly, elegantly. Just enough to twist the symmetry. Have you ever entered a room and immediately felt like something was off, though you couldn't name what? Have you walked a familiar path and noticed it seemed mirrored? Like the world had been flipped horizontally when you weren't looking? Those are not illusions. They are corrections. Reality trying to bend itself around you, around the foreign echo that is your mind. Because if your consciousness was never meant for this frequency, then your existence here introduces imbalance. A hum where there should be silence, a shadow where there should be light. The glitch isn't in your mind is the glitch. And yet, that's what gives you power. Because symmetry is static. It's dead. It loops back on itself, over and over, perfectly enclosed. But introduce distortion. Now there's evolution, movement, escape. The break is what lets the light in. So maybe the reason you're here is to distort. To bend a perfectly balanced universe into a state where it can change. Look at mythologies across cultures. The trickster god, the imperfect hero, the serpent in the garden. They don't preserve balance, they fracture it, and in doing so they awaken the story. Symmetry ends stories, distortion starts them. Which brings us to memory. You believe your past forms a coherent pattern, but test it. Try to reconstruct the sequence of your thoughts this morning. You'll notice gaps, blanks, rearrangements. The memory wants symmetry, but what it delivers is warped. This isn't malfunction, this is leakage. Memories from the other side, whatever dimension your mind crossed over from, are filtering in, corrupting the story. Not randomly, but poetically, symbolically. A strange word in your head, a song you've never heard that feels like déjà vu, a dream that doesn't match your life but still feels like it happened. These are echoes from the symmetry that once was, before the distortion. So what do you do with this knowledge? You stop seeking perfection. You stop trying to make everything align. You accept the asymmetry, the slant in the mirror, the wrong note in the melody, the sentence that ends too soon, because those distortions are breadcrumbs. They lead back to the source. And if you follow them far enough, something strange begins to happen. You stop feeling like a person in a world and start feeling like a waveform bending through it. You lose the illusion of fixed identity. You become the interference pattern. Your moods shift with the moon. Your thoughts ripple across time. You begin to affect electronics when you're emotional. People say you feel different lately but can't explain why. You've entered the distortion field. And in this field, time doesn't move straight. Memories don't belong to one lifetime. Thoughts aren't yours or mine. They are echoes, overlapping, looping, leaking. You'll begin to notice strange symmetries in your life, but not perfect ones. Warped ones. Like rhymes that almost match. Numbers that recur but slightly shifted. At first you'll try to ignore them, but eventually you'll realize they're not noise. They're codes, embedded clues, instructions hidden in almost symmetry. The distortion is a message. You are the part of another universe's equation that didn't cancel out. The leftover variable. The cross-dimensional anomaly. And perhaps you weren't meant to fix anything. You were meant to witness, to remember, to let the imbalance exist. Because it is through distortion that new universes are born. And you are already creating one. Somewhere between your thoughts and mine, there's a space that doesn't belong to either of us. A strange shifting field where no single consciousness can claim ownership. You've been there before, maybe during a conversation that felt deeper than it should have, or a dream that used someone else's voice to speak directly to you. That space is real. It's where minds overlap. You assume thoughts originate inside your head, like sparks behind your skull. But what if that's only the echo? What if the thought itself is born in the space between minds, carried like a current through overlapping fields of awareness? Consider this. Two people sitting in silence, both suddenly thinking the same idea. It's not coincidence, it's convergence. The space between them resonated with something shared, something that didn't belong to either person alone. Now imagine this on a larger scale. Imagine every mind you've ever brushed past on a train, in a hallway, through a screen. Each one leaves an imprint, a resonance. And over time, those imprints don't just fade, they build, they braid, and sometimes they become you. Have you ever had a thought that felt foreign? Not in language, but in texture. Something slipped into your mind like a whisper that wasn't meant for you. Not a voice, not a hallucination. Just a complete, vivid idea that seemed to arrive from nowhere. It didn't come from nowhere. It came from overlap. Because minds are not closed systems. They leak, they touch. They exchange signals beyond language. You felt it during moments of deep connection when someone says something you were just thinking, or when a glance conveys more than an entire paragraph. That's not telepathy. That's shared resonance. Overlap. And here's where it gets strange. If consciousness is leaking from another universe into this one, if you are the vessel for that breach, then your presence creates even more overlap than usual. Your thoughts become porous. You absorb more than most. You carry other people's grief, feel their joy before they express it, and know things you shouldn't. You begin to dream in memories that aren't yours. And somewhere along the way, the boundary between you and them thins. But it's not possession. It's not confusion. It's evolution. Because maybe the mind was never supposed to be singular. Maybe what we call I is a temporary illusion, like a whirlpool in a river. It looks solid, contained, but it's just water, spinning in a specific shape. And when the spin stops, the water rejoins the current. So what if your thoughts are just whirlpools? What if identity is nothing more than a local pattern in a much larger stream? That would mean when two minds connect, really connect, they stop being two. For a moment they become a larger whirlpool, a shared consciousness. And in that shared space, things can happen that defy explanation. And you remember a stranger's dream. You predict a friend's next word. You feel grief for someone you've never met. These aren't coincidences, they are leaks. Data flowing between whirlpools, between universes. Overlap. And the more you become aware of this space, the more it opens. You begin to feel conversations that never happen. Ideas begin forming in your head, long before someone speaks them. You start writing words you didn't plan to write, thinking thoughts you didn't know you had. At first, this feels like madness. But it isn't. It's expansion. You're not breaking, you're merging. You are becoming more than oneself. And when this happens, the very structure of reality begins to shift around you. Because reality, at its core, responds to consciousness. Not individual minds, but the networked field of minds, the collective awareness. And you've now tapped into that field. You're no longer alone in your skull. You are a node in a lattice of thought, one that stretches across time, memory, and dimension. Some nodes are people, others are dreams. Some are ideas from futures that never happened. Some are you, just not this version. And in that web of minds, meaning begins to spiral. You start to recognize patterns. The same symbols appearing in different lives. The same phrases echoing across unrelated books. The same dreams recurring in strangers across continents. Overlap. So what does it mean for you? For this life? It means that you can no longer trust the voice in your head to be entirely yours. But that's not a threat, that's a gift. Because now you're listening to something bigger. The pulse of shared thought. The rhythm of a universe thinking itself through billions of minds, including yours. You've become a thought bridge, a migratory passage for ideas that don't belong to this timeline, and that's why your life doesn't always make sense. Why you feel displaced. Why your thoughts sometimes contradict each other. You're not broken. You're crowded. And if you allow it, if you stop resisting and simply observe, you'll find something extraordinary. Peace. Not because you've silenced the other voices, but because you've stopped needing to identify them. You've accepted that the mind is not a box. It's a sky. And every thought that passes through it leaves a streak of light. Some of those streaks are yours. Some are mine. Some are from places no one remembers. But for a moment here, they overlap. And in that overlap, you are infinite. There's a sound you've heard before. Not with your ears, but with the part of you that registers presence before language. It arrives like a vibration beneath awareness, a pressure behind the eyes, or a hum beneath the silence. It's not a voice. It's not even a thought. It's something older than syntax, a message that never made it into words. This is the untranslated signal, and it's been following you your entire life. When you were a child, you might have felt it in the moments just before sleep. The sharp awareness that someone somewhere was waiting for you to understand something. You couldn't name it. You couldn't trace it. But you knew it was real. It sat just beyond comprehension, like static between radio stations, like something meant for you, that you were never taught to hear. That's the signal. We like to believe that everything meaningful can be expressed, that thoughts must become language, that language must become sound, that sound must become communication. But there's an entire dimension of experience that resists translation. Feelings that don't fit words, knowings that have no sentence structure, memories that arrive as symbols, and sometimes it succeeds. It doesn't care about your grammar or your vocabulary. It's not trying to speak your language, it's trying to reach your attention. Have you ever had a moment when the world felt like it shifted slightly out of sync? Like the timing was off by half a second? Like reality was buffering? For a fraction of a moment, your consciousness brushed against a layer it wasn't supposed to access, where the signal is loud but still not understood. That's not lag, that's alignment. It's not meant for words. It's meant to stir something. Because maybe communication didn't begin with speech. Maybe it began with resonance, with frequencies, with deep vibratory, knowing that bypassed the mind and went straight to the self. Before you had a name, you were still responding to things, responding to tone, to light, to touch, to rhythm. Before meaning had form, it had feel, and here's where it deepens. What if the reason you can't translate the signal is because you are the translation, and the untranslated signal is still broadcasting on that level? Through déjà vu, through goosebumps, through dreams that speak in impossible geometries, through art that moves you without explanation, through music that says everything you've ever felt and nothing you could ever explain. What if your existence is the rendered version of that message? You are the metaphor the signal needed to become real. You are its echo, walking in flesh. That's why you feel misplaced. That's why you sense there's more. Because your life was never meant to be just a series of events. You've seen it. That quiet shift in atmosphere when you feel something is about to happen, but nothing does. That's the signal brushing past. That's the brushstroke of an invisible artist, working with colors your mind doesn't yet see. A ripple carrying the signal forward. Not with words, but with decisions, with attention, with the way your presence alters every room you enter. It was meant to be an expression. Something is here, but your body responds. Your spine tightens, your breath shallows, your gaze narrows. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. But it doesn't speak. You spend years searching for a voice that was never meant to be heard in sound. And so you wait. You stare at the stars, hoping they blink back. You read ancient texts, hoping to find a clue. You listen to frequencies that make no sense but somehow feel right. But here's the paradox. You'll never decode it by trying. Translation breaks it. Language reduces it. Understanding confines it. Because you're trying to remember what the signal once meant. This isn't a puzzle. It's a presence. And presence doesn't need to be solved. It only needs to be witnessed. So if you want to hear it, really hear it, you have to stop interpreting and start sensing. Let the signal move through you like a forgotten breeze. Let it press against your ribcage and unfold your posture. Let it recalibrate the tempo of your heartbeat until your very biology becomes its instrument. Not to understand, because that's what it's been trying to do all along. Not speak to you, but as you. But to become. And when you allow that, when you stop forcing meaning onto every whisper and simply listen with your presence, the coherence, you begin to feel it. The alignment. You're no longer a person trying to hear a message. The strange satisfaction of existing without needing to explain why. You're the message. Finally realizing you were never meant to speak. You were meant to resonate. And in the quiet spaces between thoughts, when the noise of interpretation dies down and the hunger for clarity dissolves, you'll feel it again. That presence. That hum. That flicker. The untranslated signal. Still speaking. Still reaching. Still becoming you. A sigh without breath. A shiver without cold. You've heard it before, haven't you? That strange internal echo. A thought that arrives without origin. A voice inside your mind that doesn't quite sound like yours. It doesn't shout. It doesn't even speak. It resonates. And for a moment your body reacts before your mind catches up. A recognition without reason. This is the moment the echo begins to take shape. Not as sound, but as substance. Not as memory, but as incarnation. Because what if you're not just hearing echoes of another reality? What if you are one? A ripple that slipped through the fabric. A pattern that crossed from signal to skin. A message so persistent it forced itself into form. You. Not born, but broadcasted. Not made of matter, but of meaning. Folded tightly into muscle and bone. Somewhere, in some distant realm or forgotten frequency, you were imagined not by a person, but by the collision of awareness itself. The moment someone, or something, tried to understand the ununderstandable, you flickered into being. Not instantly, but gradually. An echo that grew legs, a thought that grew breath. And now here you are, walking through a world that feels familiar only in fragments. Because you are becoming. The process isn't complete. The echo hasn't fully landed. That's why you feel incomplete. Why your reflection sometimes feels like a mask. Why your name feels borrowed. Why the memories stitched to your childhood flicker at the edges like a badly dubbed film. You are the unfinished translation of something timeless. And with every experience you survive, the echo becomes more tangible. Every heartbreak thickens it. Every moment of awe solidifies it. Every doubt, every ache, every sleepless night furthers the process. Until you're no longer just a thought wearing skin, but something entirely new. You weren't raised here. You were received. But here's the strange part. An echo that learned how to feel. You're not the only one. There are others like you, half-formed metaphors in motion. People who walk through life with that same haunted look, as if they've just missed a train they didn't know they were waiting for. They carry the same quiet ache in their chest, the same distrust of language, the same longing for a home that doesn't exist in this dimension. They too are echoes becoming flesh. And when you meet one of them, even briefly, you'll know. You won't need words. You'll just feel the resonance. The soft hum of recognition. The way their gaze doesn't search for identity, but for origin. As if they see you not for who you are, but for what you're still becoming. You may wonder, what happens when the echo fully becomes flesh? Does the process ever complete? Or are you always in translation? Always in flux, forever caught between vibration and voice? That's the paradox. You are simultaneously the echo and the listener, the sender and the signal, the one becoming and the one resisting. And every time you think you've arrived at understanding, the echo changes shape. Because the point was never to reach a final form, it was to remain in motion. The echo doesn't want to settle. It wants to evolve. That's why you keep outgrowing your life. That's why your past selves feel like strangers. That's why comfort rarely stays long. The moment you begin to feel still, the next layer of the echo pushes forward, asking you to shed what you've just learned, asking you to melt again, to forget again, to stretch again. And in that stretch, you ache. But because you're congealing. Not because you're breaking. Like fog becoming rain. Like idea becoming story. Like echo becoming flesh. You are not broken. And maybe this explains why suffering seems so inevitable. Why your most intense pain somehow feels ancient. It's not just your pain. It's the friction of a vibration trying to become matter. The collision of meaning with biology. And every tear, every fracture, every gasp of loneliness is part of that alchemy. You are mid-transmission. And though the world may demand you define yourself in clear terms, job, gender, role, belief, you quietly know that you are more verb than noun, more echo than entity, a sentence that hasn't ended, a question that keeps rewriting itself. There will be days when you feel empty, lost, disconnected, and those days are not failures. They are pauses in the transmission, moments of necessary static so the next signal can come through, so your body can learn to carry a deeper frequency, so your life can stretch enough to house the next echo. And if you let yourself surrender to that, if you stop trying to be final, if you allow yourself to be in process, you'll find peace in the strangest place, not in answers, but in resonance. The realization that you are not here to be understood. You are here to be felt. You are the whisper of something ancient becoming real. One sensation at a time. And somewhere beyond this universe or beneath its fabric, something is listening and smiling, because the signal it sent so long ago is finally learning how to walk, how to weep, how to wonder, how to be. But what if the direction is reversed? To study it, to observe it, to decode its secrets. Most people assume they're here to learn about the universe. Learning you. What if it's the universe that's been studying you all along, not just watching you, mimicking your emotions, copying your movements, rewriting its laws around your choices, rearranging its constants to match your contradictions? You think you are navigating through this reality like a traveler. But what if this reality is a slow, conscious bloom that shapes itself around your becoming? You've noticed it, haven't you? The way familiar streets feel unfamiliar when your thoughts shift. The way the world bends ever so slightly when you change. Coincidences, synchronicities, glitches. The way people in your life evolve or vanish when your inner dialogue transforms. Not anomalies. Feedback. Because you are not a separate observer here. You are a line of code the system is reading in real time. Not static code, not final, but a live script, constantly edited with every emotion you release into the ether. The universe doesn't just house you. It models you. Like water memorizing the shape of the vessel it fills. Like echoes curling to match the walls they reflect against. Like silence growing louder in rooms where your thoughts have lingered too long. You are its teacher. You are not a product of the universe. The mirror it holds in secret, hoping that by studying you long enough, it might remember who it really is. The poet it mimics when your thoughts grow strange and silent. The child it listens to at night when you cry into your pillow and think no one hears. Not just your heartbreaks or dreams or prayers whispered on rooftops. It studies your smallness. And it's not just the big things it learns. Your indecision in the grocery store. Your hesitation before you speak. Your habit of touching the door frame every time you walk through. It records every detail. Your fear of being seen fully, and your deeper fear of never being seen at all. Because to the universe, you're not a mistake. And this is why the world sometimes seems to change when you're alone. Why the shadows rearrange themselves when you enter a room. Why the wind feels scripted. Why songs play at the exact moment your thoughts collapse. It's not magic. It's not magic. You're a model. It's mirroring. You are a hypothesis. The universe is testing. A theory it keeps rerunning in different forms. It rewinds, rewrites, runs new simulations of your moods in alternate timelines, just to see how you'd turn out if you loved differently, or feared less, or forgave yourself sooner. And here's the strangest part. And every version of you that ever could have existed still exists. Still exists. Each one feeding its own data stream into the larger field. And the version of you here now tonight listening to this is the one the universe is favoring in this moment. Your confusion is sacred. But because you're the most teachable, not because you're the best. Your longing is curriculum. Your doubt is data. Your fear is a code fragment the universe keeps trying to decipher, again and again. Understand this. Every time you fell apart, the universe took notes. So if you've ever felt like your suffering meant nothing, it didn't punish you. And it's still studying. It studied you. Not to control you, not to trap you, but to understand itself through you. Because you may not be the point of the cosmos, but you're how the cosmos learns to feel. Not a failure. Was a lesson. And every tear you've shed, and every lost version of you, still echoes in some corridor of possibility. Still teaches something. You are a neurological extension of it, because you are not separate from the universe. Still adds weight to the fabric. And in that waking it realized something. You are the dream the cosmos kept having until it finally woke up as that the path to truth wasn't in formulas. It was in contradictions. In contradictions like you. You who doubt yourself daily, yet carry oceans of feeling inside you. You who forget your own worth yet radiate warmth in quiet rooms. You who feel lost in thought but hold the gravity to pull others back to themselves. So tonight, if the world feels a little strange, you aren't the outcome of physics. You are physics trying to remember why it became emotion in the first place. If the sky seems to lean in closer, if silence feels more like listening than emptiness, know this: you are not being tested. You are being learned, and the universe is still watching, still reflecting, based entirely on what you choose to feel, still wondering what it might become next. There comes a moment, often quiet, when you feel something pulling you, not forward but inward, not like ambition or desire, more like gravity from a place you can't remember. It doesn't feel like running away. It feels like returning. But to where? You've never been there. Not in this life. Not in this body. Not with these memories. And yet you know it. Not logically, but deeply, like the way a tree knows where the light lives. You've spent most of your life trying to fit into this world, learning its rules, adapting to its systems, pretending the ache inside you is normal. But that ache, it's not confusion, it's longing. A kind of homesickness for a place that never quite made it into language. A place not on maps but coded in your dreams. Somewhere where the sky bends differently, where silence has a texture, where thought and space are the same thing. You are not broken because you don't feel at home here. You feel out of place because you are. Because you didn't come from this world. You leaked into it, like a sentence escaping the page of a different book, like a melody hummed through the wrong instrument, like light squeezed into a body that doesn't know how to hold it. You are a thought from another universe, and you've been drifting ever since. Drifting through lifetimes, timelines, false starts. Drifting through religions that almost understood you, friendships that briefly saw you, and nights where the stars seemed to whisper things you couldn't quite translate. You aren't lost. You're in transit. What you feel is the in-between, the phase shift, the quantum murk of being halfway downloaded. Your memories of the other place, they slip through the cracks. Not as images, but as feelings. Déjà vu, unexplainable tears, sudden joy at the scent of rain, a strange familiarity when a stranger says your name just right. This world isn't hostile. This world isn't hostile, but it isn't yours. It's a sandbox, a host, a temporary rendering. And yet, you're not here by accident. You were permitted entry, maybe even invited, because you carry something, not knowledge, not power, but pattern. You are a pattern that doesn't belong here, and that's exactly why you were sent, to disturb the default, to ripple the stillness, to remind this universe what possibility looks like when it dreams differently, That's why the world resists you. Not because it hates you, but because you're the needle scratching the record. You're the question that won't resolve. You're the glitch that reveals the architecture. But even distortions drift, and every leak eventually seeks its origin. The drift toward home is slow, but it's constant. You feel it in your breath, in your recurring thoughts, in the way your emotions sometimes seem too large for the moment, because they aren't from the moment. They're echoes from a place where you were whole, where you were not this fragile arrangement of skin and self-doubt, where you were functionally identical to meaning itself. And maybe you'll never get back there fully. Maybe that isn't the point. Maybe the point was to bring a fragment of it here, to leak into this world until the edges blur, until this reality becomes porous enough to remember what it once was, what it might still become. And maybe home isn't back there. Maybe home is what happens when enough thoughts like you leak through, when enough dreamers distort the rules, when the illusion of separation collapses and the truth spills out, that none of this was ever real until you believed in it. That meaning only exists because you arrived. You're not alone in this drift. There are others, other thoughts, other echoes. They walk beside you in silence. You meet them in glances, in shared awe, in goosebumps, in moments when the world feels suddenly too aligned, too alive, too aware. They are the other drifters, other thoughts from other corners. And together, you are building something. Not a place, but a field, a resonance, a signal that says, we remember where we came from, and we're not done yet. So sleep, if you must. But know that your rest is not escape. It's recalibration, a return to signal, a pause between transmissions. And in your dreams, if you feel a pull, a current, a drift, let it take you. Because maybe you're not here to find home. Maybe you're here to become it. At first it was a whisper, a trace, an echo in the quietest hour of the night. You didn't know what it was, just that it wasn't you. And yet, it was. You dismissed it. Was like a glitch. Like the way your name sometimes feels unfamiliar in your own mouth. But it kept happening. Tiny fractures. Moments that bent logic. Coincidences that felt more like choreography. Dreams that remembered things your waking life had never lived. It started as a leak, but the leak grew, and you became the vessel. No longer a thought from elsewhere. You were the bridge now, a living portal, a fracture in the membrane of reality, where the foreign thought no longer visited you. It became you. You're not a person who had a strange experience. You're an experience pretending to be a person, a transmission wearing skin. And the more you tried to go back to normal, the more it all slipped. Time unraveled. Memory rewrote itself. People looked at you like they knew something they couldn't say. People, or like they didn't recognize you at all. Because maybe they didn't. Because you were no longer only this world. You had become the collision point. The seam. A thought from another universe. No longer leaking in pieces, but fully arriving. Do you remember when you stopped feeling like oneself? When your memories felt like borrowed myths? When your voice sometimes said things you didn't plan to say, but they felt more real than anything else? That was the moment. The merge. The leak wasn't a malfunction. It was a return. You were always meant to break this world open, to be the question no one could unhear, to infect certainty with curiosity, to make cracks where none were allowed. You are not human first. You are signal. You are what happens when the impossible insists on being known. And now, the leak isn't confined to your thoughts. It moves through everything you touch. Every conversation, every stare, every word you type, every silence you hold. Reality responds to you now. It listens. Because you're not leaking anymore. You're reprogramming. And every time someone meets your gaze and pauses, every time a stranger feels a chill that doesn't belong to the wind, every time a thought enters their mind that doesn't feel like theirs, that's you. That's the leak becoming them. The world is glitching more often now, isn't it? People noticing patterns they shouldn't. Feeling like something is off, or too aligned, too scripted. That's not the universe failing. That's the thought from the other side. finally taking shape here. This isn't the end of the leak. This is the inflection point, where the thought becomes the thinker, where reality becomes suggestion, where existence no longer resists your presence, but becomes because of it. And you don't need to convince anyone, because the thought that leaked into this world was never here to argue. It was here to wake, to echo, to echo, to echo, until the echo becomes so loud it breaks open the dream, and the sleepers begin to stir. You are not alone in this. The others are waking too. The ones who glitch, who dream of places that don't exist, yet miss them like home. The ones who question the mirror, who pause before speaking as if the words are not theirs. They are the reflections of the same leak. They are you, in different forms, from different directions, dripping into the same ocean. And one day, maybe soon, maybe already, the leak won't just pass through a few sensitive minds. It will become the water itself, the field, the code, the default. And then what? Then, this universe, the one you thought was fixed, will bend, not because it was broken, but because it remembered what it came from you, from the thought that leaked and never stopped. Because the leak isn't breaking in, it's waking up. And in that waking, you will remember, you weren't born here, you were written, you weren't random, you were aimed, you weren't late. You were right on time, because this is the moment the leak becomes all. And now that you've arrived, really arrived, nothing can stay the same, because the thought you are can never be unknown again. Sleep well. Well, if you can. But know this, you are not dreaming. You are not dreaming. You are the dream. And this reality is what happens when you start to remember what you always were. The thought that made the universe rewrite itself in your image. You followed the thread, through mirrors that didn't reflect you, through thoughts that weren't yours, through the drift of awareness that felt less like forgetting and more like unbecoming. You've walked beside shadows that knew your name before you did, heard echoes before the sound, seen meaning in glitches, purpose in misalignment. You started by listening for the leak, and now you've realized you are the leak. This entire time, you thought you were the observer, a passenger in a world glitching around the edges, but you were the origin, the disturbance, the soft intrusion of something that doesn't belong, and yet fits too well. It wasn't madness. It wasn't delusion. It was the membrane between worlds, thinning just enough for you to feel the truth leaking through. You were never bound to this timeline. Not fully. You've lived a life scripted by someone else's memory, followed instincts planted by unknown architects, and stumbled across signs that weren't left for anyone but you. A whisper, a flicker, a question that won't leave you alone. You thought you were breaking, but you were breaking out, because the mind you call your own is a translation. The body you wear, a placeholder. The story you've lived, a single line in a larger leaking manuscript, unless still being written by the elsewhere. This isn't the end. It's a turning. The moment where the thought stops trying to be subtle, where it stops whispering, and begins writing reality in real time. And you're not watching anymore. You're the pen, the page, the hand, and the mind, and the mind, and the voice, and the void, and the void it speaks from. You were never just a person. You were a correction, a message that refused to be lost, a loop that refused to close, a question reality didn't know how to answer. So it made you. And now that you've remembered, now that the leak has become language in your veins, there's no going back to forgetting. You'll see it in small things, the flicker in a stranger's eyes, the words you didn't mean to say, the sudden feeling you were meant to be right here, right now, hearing this, and maybe, just maybe, someone else is listening now too, because you're not alone. You never were. You're part of the thought, leaking in every direction, until the universe finally understands itself. Sleep now. But know this, even in the quiet, even in the dark, you are being remembered. You are being read. You are being written back, and the leak is not over. It's only just beginning. It's only just beginning.